Chapter 239. 240. The Grain Store Dispute 1. I thank you on behalf of my husband. Meng Zhan's friend quietly stepped away to avoid Meng Zhan's concubine's bow. Not to mention anything else, but based on the gossip he heard, he felt that the Mengs did not live up to its reputation. He had never heard of the Mengs using a concubine to pretend to be the legitimate son. He didn't want to get involved in this mess. Chief Meng needs to rest after this incident. You can't get angry again in case it hurts your foundation. Before the medical officer could step out of the main street where the Meng residence was located, he was hurriedly called back. He wrote a new prescription and gave a few instructions. His friend took the chance to leave. He was worried that he would hear another scandal if he stayed any longer. Meng Liang died. Everyone in the Meng's family mourned. They wore plain linen clothes. The Meng's army was also ordered to mourn for the second Langjun. Meng Zhan's action was met with a lot of resistance. He was scolded by several elders. Who was Meng Liang? A son of the first wife who was not even 20 years old. To the public he was the son of the first wife. However, some of the elders who had heard the rumors knew that Meng Liang's identity was different. His identity as the son of the first wife was still a question mark. It was not like the Meng family was so short of people that Meng Liang was the only one. There were still many candidates for the Meng family. A son of the first wife died and the entire Meng's army mourned for him. Who did he think he was? Even if the emperor of Dongqing passed away, he wouldn't be treated like this. More importantly, it was a critical moment. The civil unrest in Tsang Prefecture was getting worse. Mobs were everywhere. The Meng's army needed to clean up their colleagues. They didn't have time to mourn for a young boy. Speaking of which, Meng Liang was the source of the civil unrest. If it weren't for the fact that the boy was too much of a bastard and made the people angry, the Mengs wouldn't be in such an awkward situation. It was better for him to die. He didn't have a good background anyway. If it weren't for the fact that Meng Zhan loved him so much that he wouldn't give him anything and even ignored the legitimate eldest son of the first wife, the elders wouldn't have cared about Meng Liang. He was just a piece of mud that couldn't be helped. He was a waste of air when alive and a waste of land when dead. Meng Zhan's heart was as hard as steel. He refused to give in even half a step. The two sides were locked in a stalemate. As a result, there were several voices within the Meng family's army. The news of the civil unrest that they had painstakingly concealed seemed to have grown wings and spread among the people. When the people in the neighboring counties and prefectures heard the news, they panicked and felt insecure. The Meng family is truly a sinner. A plain-looking carriage stopped on the mountain road. The man in the carriage lifted the curtain and saw the people fighting outside. Their clothes were ragged and their faces were yellow from hunger. It was a scene of chaos. The man sighed in his heart and put down the hand that lifted the curtain. Judging from his appearance, he wasn't the man who was a guest at the Meng residence. At this moment, the guard outside asked him in a low voice, "Master, should we return to Shangjing first or?" The guard's voice was filled with concern and nervousness. There were only 11 of them, including the man. With such a small group of people, if they encountered a large wave of rioters, they could not guarantee the safety of the man in the carriage. The longer they stayed, the more dangerous it would be. The man went silent for a moment before he said abruptly, "No, let's go to Langjia." He had some doubts and was eager to seek confirmation from his young friend. The guard did not even think about it. He answered yes and pulled the reins of the carriage. Soon, the seemingly ordinary carriage completely disappeared on the vast mountain road. "Yuanjing, what kind of students do you have?" Faintly, the man seemed to be complaining. There were different voices within the Meng family's army. The suppression was lax, which made the already serious civil unrest even more intense. Hejian County, which was only half a month away from Meng County, was naturally the first to be affected. Jiang Pingji returned to the mansion from the streets as usual. The information she collected made her look cold. The audience in the streaming room could feel the low pressure around her through the screen. Even the funny comments on the bullet screen had decreased greatly. The price of grain has soared to 8 times the original price. Even so, the supply still cannot meet the demand. Suku hurriedly jumped off the carriage and hurried to Jiang Pingji's study room. He knelt in front of her and said, "Langjun, it's time for us to take action." When the price of grain skyrocketed, it would be difficult for them to lower the price. By then they would have to face the resistance of all the grain merchants in Hejian County. The grain merchants were supported by the gentry clans. They were not afraid of one or two of them, but it would be hard to say if they joined forces. No hurry. Jiang Pingji was expressionless. She seemed to be deep in thought, which made Suku so anxious that he almost couldn't speak. It was not the time to act aloof. Let me ask you, have you found any refugees from the nearby counties? Jiang Pingji asked. Not near Hejin County, but there are many in Zisong County. Zisong County was near Hejin County, which was closer to Meng County in Song Prefecture. If there were refugees, they would be the first to appear. I got it. Jiang Pingji pounded her palms and said, tell the grain stores to put out the signboards and try to spread it throughout Hejin County. We must let every citizen know that the 3 grain stores will be buying large quantities of cheap grain. Signboards? Suku was startled. What is that? It means to widely advertise. Hire 30 to 50 children or hooligans who are familiar with the roads nearby. Give them some money and let them advertise on the streets. Jiang Pingji explained. Anyway, we must let the people know as soon as possible. Suku's eyes flashed. If it were not for the situation, he would have praised his Longjuan's idea. Nowadays there were too few people who could read. Even if they put up the signboards at the city gates, not many people would know about the grain stores. The effect was minimal. If they let children or hooligans advertise everywhere, it would be faster and wider than just putting up the signboards. The key was that the labor cost was not high. I'll do it now. Suku calmed himself down, bowed to Jiang Pingji and left. Wait. Jiang Pingji suddenly shouted and stopped Suku, who was in a hurry to leave. Before we do this, go and find out which grain store has the lowest price. The price we set will always be 20% lower than the lowest price. Suku was dumbfounded. Not the normal price? Jiang Pingji snorted and said, we just need to be kinder than the black-hearted merchants. We are good people, understand? Suku was still dumbfounded. It was different from what he had imagined. Don't worry. The price will not go on. Jiang Pingji said calmly, our price will only be 20% lower than the other grain stores. If they want to compete, they will naturally lower their price. Then we will lower it by 20%. Chapter 240. When Jiang Pingji started to take measures, the price of grain had already soared to more than 9 times the price in peacetime. The aristocratic families had their own granaries, so they didn't have to worry about food and drink. Instead, they could take advantage of this opportunity to sell off the old grain stored in the granary at a high price. On the contrary, the common people had little savings and their families were about to starve to death. However, the price of grain was rising fiercely. Many people were worried about it. Many women were pacing back and forth in front of the grain stores, waiting for the grain to be cheaper. They didn't expect the price to go up every time. If we don't buy more, we won't even be able to afford a bucket of rice with our savings. You can still afford to buy rice? My husband broke his leg a while ago, and we've spent all our money to buy medicine for him. Today we even slaughtered the only hen that could lay eggs to make soup for him. I really don't know how we're going to live like this. I don't know what happened. Why is the grain so expensive? If this goes on, the kids at home will have to go hungry. Even if they were hardworking and capable, they had no money and no grain at home. Their families would have to go hungry. The grain store was not a charity. How could the price be lowered just because they were poor? The world is getting more and more difficult every day. A woman sighed and said, a while ago I was helping to wash the dishes in the tea house at the entrance of the city to earn some pocket money. I heard some soldiers talking about it. It seems that there is a big mess in some county in Zhangzhou. It is close to Hejin County. The proximity meant that the flames of war could reach here, and it also meant that countless refugees who had left their homes would flee here. Which family wouldn't tremble in fear when they heard about the war? If their strong young men were conscripted into the army, they might not be able to come back. As for the refugees, if people were in that state, what wouldn't they do besides burning, killing, and looting? Maybe it would be even crueler than robbing people. Many women trembled just thinking about it. At least they had some savings at home so they could buy grain from the grain store. The other poorer families could only dig weeds in the mountains and peel bark from trees. The food they ate was not even as good as the old sows in their pigsty. Should we go to other grain stores? Maybe there are cheaper ones. A woman in a dark linen robe hesitantly held a basket and looked at the grain store not far away. There were many grain stores in the city. After comparing 3 stores, there was bound to be one that was cheaper. If I had known that this would happen, I would have gone to buy them a long time ago. I thought that it was expensive back then, but who could have known that the price of grain would only get higher by the day? That's right. In the past, my husband thought that I was short-sighted and that the weather was good this year, so the food would be cheaper than before. He thought that I would wait a few more days. But now it's so much more expensive. I don't know how I'm going to survive. The women walked together, holding each other's hand, chatting with each other. At this moment, a child wearing patched clothes ran over from the corner of the street, laughing and shouting loudly. A woman raised her hand to stop the child and asked carefully, "Hey, what did you just say?" It seemed that this was not the first time the child had been stopped. He answered in a loud voice very naturally. The grain shop in the Dogtail Alley on Vermilion Bird Street is the cheapest. It's 20% cheaper than the other shops. How much is 20% cheaper? The child shook his head. I don't know. The owner of the grain shop said that it's 20% cheaper. After all, he was just a child. Suka knew that children could not remember the price of grain, so he simply asked them to remember the shortest advertisement. The women looked at each other in confusion. Should we go and take a look? They could save as much as they could even if they had to go around half of the city. Let's go and take a look. It's not far from here. After a few words, the women had decided where to go. To attract more customers, Jiang Pingji had divided the area where the 3 grain shops were located into 3 parts. With the grain store's location as the center, the mobile advertisements in this area would focus on the grain store. When the women arrived, there was already a long queue in front of the grain shop. Listening to the people's discussion, the price of grain was still high, but it was indeed much cheaper than the other grain shops they had seen before. But there are no good things if they are cheap. Could it be that the grain they are selling has bugs, or something else? With their sharp ears they could hear the discussion from the crowd. Immediately someone jumped out and said, "Someone bought 2 buckets of grain. I have seen it. It's white and good." There was more than one person who was worried about the quality of the grain in the grain shop. Hearing that, he became even more worried. That's strange. Others are raising the price, but they are lowering the price. Isn't it said that merchants are black-hearted? A man who was queuing up to buy food couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "What do you know? Don't you know who the owner of the grain shop is? It's the famous Hu County chief. I heard that Hu County has so much grain that it can rot on the ground. So what if it's cheap? Don't buy it if you don't like it." Hey, why are you so blunt? How would I know that the owner of the grain shop is Lu Shi? Ordinary people might not have heard of Lu Shi, but when Hu County chief was mentioned, their first impression was that he was rich, had grain, and had a good heart. With the promotion of the advertisements, the queue in front of the grain shop became longer and longer. Many people who came late were worried that they would not be able to buy grain. At that moment, the manager of the grain shop stood out and bowed to the crowd, saying that the store had enough grain. Outside the crowd, Jiang Pingji and Suku were sitting in the carriage. Suku looked at the crowd and felt worried. There were so many people buying grain. He was worried that the store would not have enough grain. The effect of the advertisements was beyond his expectation. The queue was still growing. Jiang Pingji could see his worry at first glance. She said calmly, "For the people, the price of grain is still too high. Most of them are just watching and won't buy in large quantities. So, our store of grain will definitely last. By the way, have you prepared the people I asked you to prepare?" Suku cupped his hands and said, "Langyun, I have arranged everything." "Good. When there are more and more people watching, you can ask them to leave." Jiang Pingji's purpose was to suppress the grain price, not to sell the few thousand don of grain at the high price. Not only did she ask Suku to hire children and hooligans to act as mobile advertisements for the grain stores, but she also asked him to prepare a few people. These people were not to fool the people who bought the grain, but to sway the shopkeepers of other grain stores. Jiang Pingji started the price war. On the first day, she created the illusion that there was no limit to the grain store. Naturally, the other grain shops would be nervous. Chapter 241. To improve competitiveness, one had to start with the products themselves, the service attitude, or the price. Nowadays, people just wanted to survive. High-quality services were meaningless. What mattered most was to feed themselves with the least amount of money. Therefore, if other grain stores wanted to compete with Jiang Pingji, they had to lower their prices. Once they lowered their prices, Jiang Pingji would achieve her goal. The price war was always a trap. The party who had the upper hand would fight harder and harder. Those who tried to imitate her could only be led by the nose. Not to mention her main goal was not to make money. If they tried to compete with her, they would definitely be cheated. The few pawns he had prepared were actually just pawns to confuse the grain shops. Yes, Suku answered. Jiang Pingji put down the curtain and looked serious. She suddenly asked him, "Who do you think is responsible for this mess?" Suku, the blame. Whose fault? Jiang Pingji asked again. It seemed that Suku did not understand the meaning of the word blame. Suku thought about it seriously and looked serious. After all, it was a test given by his Langjun. If he performed poorly, it would affect his position in her heart. The time they spent together was enough for Suku to understand one thing. Langjun did not look at other people's conditions, only at their abilities. If he was incompetent in her heart, he would not be put in an important position in the future. However, Langjun's question was too broad. Suku could not answer it. Is this question hard to answer? Jiang Pingji asked. Suku quickly said, I am incompetent, but I have some opinions about this question. On the surface, it should be the Mengs in Songzhou that caused the people in Hejian to worry about their livelihood. But after thinking about it carefully, I think it should be more than that. Jiang Pingji did not agree or disagree. She continued to ask, anything else? Suku gathered his courage and answered, maybe, it's the problem of the aristocratic families. Jiang Pingji's gaze drifted to Suku's face. The audience in the streaming room could clearly see Suku's stiff expression. Zwizen Beishijing, don't be like this. You are scaring the young Suku. Steak, shredded pork, fine noodles. But Suku is really digging his own grave. The streamer's current identity is that of an aristocratic family. To say that all of this is the fault of an aristocratic family in front of an aristocratic family is simply asking for a beating. Lao Ciji Lianming, #propping chin. That's not right. The streamer doesn't like aristocratic families, okay? This answer is too broad. It's a universal answer, but what I want to know is more detailed inside information. Jiang Pingji wasn't angry because of Suku's offense. She was just not satisfied with his answer. Suku stood rooted to the ground in a daze. This question is indeed a bit difficult for you. Why don't you think about why the food supply is increasing so rapidly? Why couldn't the government take measures to protect the interests of the people? It had increased by 9 times. The few grain shops seemed to have discussed this beforehand. They raised the prices as they pleased, filling their money bags but forcing countless people to starve. Suku said embarrassedly, most of the grain shops are under the name of the aristocratic families. They have a lot of food and the government doesn't have such laws. More importantly, most of the officials were from those aristocratic families. Would they deliberately make life difficult for their families? Jiang Pingji didn't look happy. Even though she had achieved some results in suppressing the food price, she still wasn't in a good mood. If she wasn't in a good mood, the others wouldn't either. With that in mind, she was determined to occupy the grain market in Hejian County for the next 2 months. If you were the chief of Hejian County and you wanted to save the people, what would you do? Jiang Pingji threw another question to him. Suku complained in his heart. Who didn't know that the chief of Hejian County was just a mascot? He didn't have any power or influence. He only had a title which couldn't suppress the rampant aristocratic families. Even if he had a bodhisattva's heart, he could only be indifferent when he was in that position. However, Suku wasn't an ordinary person. After thinking hard, he came up with a very bold idea. His Langjun always did not play by the rules. His thinking was even more unconstrained and unrestrained. Since that was the case, why didn't he change his way of thinking? Maybe he could get a different answer. Suku had a flash of inspiration. He had an idea. If I am the chief of Hejian County, I have no power or influence. I only have the title of the chief. I can't stop the soaring food price. If that's the case, why don't I encourage the grain merchants to continue to raise the price? The higher the better. Jiang Pingji's eyes lit up. She had a faint smile on her lips. The audience in the live streaming room was confused. Didn't you say you wanted to suppress the food price? Why did the host agree with Suku's answer? Lao Ciji Lianming, I think I understand Suku's idea. To encourage the price of food to skyrocket, he secretly sent people to the neighboring counties to promote the food and encourage the grain merchants there to transport the food to Hejian County to sell. When the supply increased and the demand remained the same, the price would naturally decrease. Merchants pursued profits. That was a common saying no matter what era it was. But this method can only be used once. Jiang Pingji nodded. She was very satisfied with Su Ke's answer. After all, he was a talent that she thought highly of. Jiang Pingji hoped that Su Ke could be more useful. After all, she was in dire need of manpower. Before she could find suitable people, she could only make Su Ke more useful. At the same time, Su Ke felt a chill down his spine. He had a vague premonition. There were many customers wandering in front of the other grain stores. Even if they were not going to buy, they were all potential customers. In less than half a day, all those people suddenly disappeared. It made the manager of the grain store, who was ready to make a big profit, very confused. He sent a worker to find out what was going on. And he got a reply. Who is so bold? The manager of the grain store was furious. It was like stealing food from a tiger's mouth. The worker nervously told him the owner of the grain store, and then he became silent. It seemed to be a competition between grain stores, but if it was too embarrassing, the power behind each store would be involved. The worker hesitantly asked, "Manager, what should we do?" What else can we do? Let's leave it at that. I will go to the manor and ask the head butler." At the same time, many managers of the grain stores in Hejian County made the same decision. Grain stores could not make a lot of money, but it was difficult for them to lose money. The aristocratic families did not take it seriously at first and let the managers make the decisions. The managers thought about it and decided that it was okay to make less money. Since it was a profit anyway, they might as well lower the price to the same. Chapter 242. What is the Luz trying to do? The shopkeeper of the grain store slammed the cupboard loudly. His old face was flushed with anger and blue veins were popping on his forehead. He was suppressing his terrible anger. Who in this world would complain about not earning enough money? There was such a good opportunity in front of him, but the Luz jumped out to mess it up. The clerk looked at the deserted store and felt embarrassed. He whispered, "Shopkeeper, should we lower the price too?" If they didn't lower the price, they wouldn't be able to sell their stock. Earning less was better than not earning at all. The shopkeeper of the grain store was so angry that his beard was flying. He had completely lost his rationality. However, he did not want to be led by the nose when it came to lowering the price. "We can't lower the price." The shopkeeper clenched his teeth and said, "According to the Luz behavior, they must have a lot of grain in their warehouse. They can afford to squander like this. If we lower the price and they continue to lower it, what should we do?" Even though the head of the family had given him the power to manage the grain store, if he couldn't make a satisfactory profit every quarter, he would be the one to suffer when the higher-ups questioned him. "Let's wait for a while and find someone to investigate the situation of the Lu mansion." The shopkeeper paced back and forth in the store with his hands behind his back. It seemed like he was going to break the tiles under his feet. The clerk asked, "Should we send someone to investigate their warehouse?" The shopkeeper was so angry that he almost laughed. He grinned and said, "Investigate the warehouse of the Luz?" The clerk shook his head like a rattle drum. What a joke. The granary was a money box for the aristocratic families. It was related to their daily meals. An outsider was not only allowed to investigate the granary, but if he was caught, it would be tantamount to poisoning someone's kitchen. It would be fine if he wasn't caught, but if he was, he would completely offend the Luz. The clerk scratched his head and asked the shopkeeper seriously, "Shopkeeper, I know you are the smartest. Do you have any ideas?" Looking at the clerk's flattering smile, the shopkeeper raised his hand and stroked his goatee. His eyes flashed with pride. "Come closer." The two of them whispered in each other's ears. The shop assistant's expression changed from confusion to sudden realization. He admired the shopkeeper's sophistication even more. "Great idea." The clerk patted the shopkeeper's horse. "Shopkeeper, you are so smart." "What is this?" The shopkeeper felt much better and was no longer as angry as before. "When it comes to managing the county and the people, I naturally can't compare to County Chief Lu. But in terms of business, I'm afraid County Chief Lu is just a layman and doesn't know the ropes. If that person really understood, how could he have made such a mistake and tried in vain to keep lowering the price? A crude scheme that harmed others without benefiting himself. In business, business was business. Although County Chief Lu was talented, he was just a boorish man when it came to business. Almost no one would have thought that it was not Lu Shi's doing that the 3 grain stores of the Lus used the method of lowering prices to win over customers. They couldn't be blamed for the misunderstanding. Who asked the former Lu Shi and the current Jiang Pingji to dislike attending poetry gatherings? Don't think that these activities were boring. In fact, it was also an important way to promote oneself. It was the best place to show off one's talent and fame. If he didn't package himself and promote himself, how would others remember him? The former Lu Shi wouldn't have done that, but the current Jiang Pingji disdained to do so. Therefore, in the second branch of the Lus, outsiders always thought that Lu Shi was the head of the family. Naturally, he was the first person they thought of when something happened. Unintentionally, Lu Shi had become Jiang Pingji's scapegoat. In the eyes of outsiders, how could offending Lu Shi and offending Lu Shi's son be the same? Everyone bullied the weak and feared the strong. If it was the former, 99% of people would be afraid. After all, Lu Shi was not someone to be trifled with. If it was the latter, people would probably come to pressure him with all kinds of excuses. Even if they didn't torture you to death, they would still annoy you to death. If they couldn't afford to offend their father, why would they be afraid of the bastard? Of course, if they really did that, they would probably understand a principle. The bastard was even more dangerous than the father. The latter would only make you suffer while the former would directly kill you. The clerk flattered the shopkeeper. That's right. I think so too. When it comes to making money, no one can be more experienced than you. Let's wait and see. The shopkeeper said decisively. I'd like to see how much grain he has and how many days he can squander. Because they had more grain than they had expected, the purchase limit was not implemented the next day. Jiang Pingji coldly looked at the statistics on the table. It was the price records of 31 grain stores in Hejin County. After the first price cut, they seemed to have reached some kind of tacit understanding. Not only did they not follow suit, but they also chose to ignore the 3 grain stores of the Lus. They let their own grain store be deserted with not a single customer coming in. They did not move at all. Jiang Pingji saw that and sneered. You're quite calm, but that's all. If they chose to lower their prices immediately, the loss would be small. If they continued to be so reserved, she would not be polite. Early the next morning, Jiang Pingji asked Su Ku to do something for her. Langjun, do you really want to do this? Su Ku's eyes widened. Wouldn't that be too wicked? Jiang Pingji held a roll of books in her hand. She knocked on the table and said angrily, You saw the grand occasion yesterday. Although the people were attracted to the grain stores, not many people actually bought the grain because of the high prices. It was not that there were not many people, but it was less than she had expected. She was not satisfied with the transaction amount. Su Ku did not dare to respond. With the prices of the grain stores yesterday, it would be strange if there were many people who actually bought the grain. Although the prices of the 3 grain stores of the Lus had been lowered twice, it was still higher than the people's consumption level. Another day of price reduction. The people would naturally have the mentality of wait a little longer, maybe it will be even cheaper. I've read the information my father gave me about Hu County. There is a lot of rain this year, so it should be a bumper harvest year. The drought in the neighboring 2 prefectures is also better than in previous years. The pressure of the food shortage will be much smaller than in previous years, which means that the grain prices will be exceptionally low after the autumn harvest. Jiang Pingji said coldly, We'd better convert the 5,000 dawn of grain we have into money before the autumn harvest. After the autumn harvest, we can buy the grain at a low price. After that, the price of the grain will increase by several times. If we can't sell it, we will lose money. Although the grain was not a business, who would want to make a few hundred if they could make a profit of 10,000 dawn? Jiang Pingji lacked everything at the moment. She could only use the method of increasing income and reducing expenditure to the maximum. She wanted to turn the 5,000 dawn of grain into the biggest profit. Su Ku was silent. So this was the reason why his Langjun wanted to cheat the grain stores of the other noble families? Very good and very powerful. He was speechless. Chapter 243. Excluding the 3 grain stores of the Lus, there are still 28 grain stores in Hejin County. After lowering their prices yesterday, all of them are looking forward to buying grain. It seems that they are suspicious of our grain storage. If so, why don't we tempt them to buy grain? For 1 grain store, a few thousand dawn of grain was a lot, but for 28 grain stores it was nothing. Jiang Pingji had carefully made a budget. She set aside a part of it for the limited purchase and sold the rest to those suckers at a high price. Suku was speechless. Suddenly he felt lonely, like a hero who had no place to show his skills. His Langjun was too capable and he who was her right-hand man felt sad. But, will they really do that? Suku did not know much about business, so he was a little nervous. In fact, Jiang Pingji did not know much either. After all, she was a genetic warrior and fighting was the mainstream of her life. Most of the skills and knowledge she learned were related to practical fighting. But she lived in an era where information was extremely advanced, so she could always learn something. She was not an expert, but she could still imitate others. Not to mention the suppression of business in ancient times. Of course she could handle it. Of course they will. Even if we don't spread the news that we don't have enough grain, they will secretly test us. Jiang Pingji was a layman when it came to business, but when it came to cheating people and maximizing profits, she was the master of it. Whether it was in ancient times or in her previous era as a general, she was not a reckless or brainless person. On the contrary, most of those people were smart. They looked crude, but they had a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Jiang Pingji was chosen by her old boss, stood out from many candidates and became the commander of an army. Of course, she was not ordinary. Ask the shopkeepers of the grain stores to pay attention and record the appearance of every person who buys grain and the grain they buy, Jiang Pingji said. If I'm not wrong, those grain stores will send people to secretly buy grain from our grain stores to test us. She continued, what you need to do is to let your people spread the rumor, and at the same time have the shopkeepers and workers put on a show. Put on a show? What kind of show? Of course, they would secretly say that there was not enough grain in the granary, and let the shopkeepers ask their master what they should do next. As long as the people who came to buy grain accidentally overheard it and brought it back, Jiang Pingji's goal would be achieved. Suku sighed in his heart and said, okay, I'll go and do it now. Right, go ahead. Although Suku was young, he was thorough and steady in his work. Jiang Pingji had always been at ease when she handed things over to him. Jiang Pingji's prediction was accurate. After noon, there were indeed a few people who bought a large amount of grain. One of them even bought a whole stone. If it was any other time, any commoner with a little extra money would be able to afford one stone. But now that the price of grain had skyrocketed, a single stone was a huge deal. When the sun was about to set, the clerk of the Lu's grain store hurriedly ran into the store from the side door. He was so anxious that he didn't even have time to wipe his sweat. He looked at the shopkeeper in panic, as if he had something important to report but couldn't say it directly in front of the other commoners. Seeing that, the shopkeeper put down the customer he was serving and went to a corner to talk with the clerk. One could vaguely hear words like, 1,900 dawn, and not enough. The inside of the grain store was very noisy. There were many people buying grain everywhere. It was hard to hear their conversation unless one was paying attention. However, among this batch of people who were buying grain, many of them were spies from other grain stores. Is what you said true? The spy answered, it's true. I heard them say that they have less than 1,900 dawn of grain. If they continue to sell like this, it won't last more than a few days. After hearing that, the spy pondered for a while and made a decision in his heart. Apart from the 3 grain stores of the Lus, the other 28 grain stores were hoping to make a fortune this time. Seeing that the people who were buying grain had gone to their competitors' stores, they were anxious. 2 of the stores even decided to lower their prices the next day. When they heard the news, they were all excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. 1,900 dawn was not much even if it was divided among the 28 grain stores. If they could buy this batch of grain from the Lus, they could naturally continue to raise the price and still make a profit. Now the news of the civil unrest in Xianxia was getting more and more intense. The refugees not only affected Zisong County, but also spread to Hejian County. It was a good opportunity to make a fortune. If they missed this opportunity, they would not get another one. How could they let the Lus ruin it? In a word, bye-bye. Therefore, on the 3rd day, the 3 grain stores of the Lus welcomed a large number of people who were buying grain. It also drove the real buyers to make up their minds to buy grain. They had all heard the rumor that the cheap grain of the Lus was running out. If they did not buy now, they would have to buy grain with sky-high prices in the future. If they could not afford it, they would starve to death. On the 3rd day, the business of the grain stores reached its peak. Even when the grain stores were closed, There were still many people who did not buy grain wandering in front of the doors. The shopkeeper and the clerk could only persuade them to leave in a gentle voice. Today's grain is sold out. If you want to buy more, come back tomorrow. The grain stores are closing now. The people looked at each other. In their hearts, they thought that the shopkeeper was just saying perfunctorily. They were very disappointed. On the fourth day, the business of the grain stores was still good, but they closed before noon, which further confirmed the rumor that the grain stores were running out of grain. Humph, the Lu County chief has made great achievements in governing the region, but he knows nothing about business. He is so stupid to give up a watermelon and throw away a sesame seed. Many people laughed in their hearts. The Lus did make a lot of money, but that was all. If they had been patient, they could have made 5 or 6 times the money or even more. On the 5th day, the grain stores in Zhou County seemed to have reached an agreement. They all adjusted the prices of their grain stores. The prices were set. If they did not want to buy, they could wait for their whole family to starve to death. However, the expected customers did not come. After asking carefully, the shopkeepers of several grain stores almost had a heart attack. They thought that the grain stores of the Lus would not open today, but the people found that they opened earlier than usual. Hey, what is this? The people looked at the sign outside the grain stores and did not understand it. This is a limited purchase. At this time, a man in a green scholar's robe was standing in the crowd with a feather fan in his hand. Who else could it be but Qiguanrang? What is a limited purchase? Out of 100 people, 99 were illiterate. How could they understand a limited purchase? The people respected the scholar. They all made way for Qiguanrang so that he could read the sign. He calmly walked forward and read the content of the sign clearly. Then he explained in a way that the people could understand. The grain stores are still open, but each person can only buy 2 days' worth of grain for a family of 4. We will not sell more than that. Limited purchase? They had never seen or heard of such a way of selling. Many people found it hard to get used to it. If this was the case, didn't it mean that they had to go to the grain stores every 2 or 3 days? Why couldn't they sell it all at once? Chapter 244. Although there was cheap food, there was still a restriction on the purchase which made many people feel disgusted and repelled. Zhou County was not a big place, but it was not small either. It was really troublesome to go to a grain store just to buy 1 or 2 days' worth of food. Is there no food in your store? Why do you want to limit the purchase instead of making money? A man's voice came from the crowd. He was wearing sackcloth and his hair was tied up with straw rope. He looked like an ordinary farmer. At this moment, the people gathered in front of the grain store seemed to have been enlightened. They started chattering. It's okay if there's no food. Why are you tormenting us? There are other stores in Zhou County that sell food even if you don't sell. The world is not safe now. What if you run into bad people when you travel so far just for a little food? What he said was exactly what many people were thinking. They were even more worried. That's right. Taking the risk to travel so far away for such a small amount of food, isn't this harming others? Yes, do you have food or not? Give us a definite answer. If you do, sell it. If you don't waste our time. We can buy from other stores. If we are delayed by you and the price of the food rises again, will you be responsible? You are so evil. I don't see you selling it much cheaper than others. Why are you playing these tricks? Are you going to sell it or not? If not, leave. Many people in the crowd shouted. They were all pointing at the grain store and trying to shake the people's hearts. Qiguanrang stood calmly at the side. Others might not be able to tell, but he could tell that those who were trying to sow discord were not malicious. Rather than saying that they were trying to sow discord, it would be more accurate to say that they were trying to stir up the atmosphere and mislead the people. Therefore, he didn't stand out to explain the benefits of the purchase restriction. Instead, he looked at the grain store with a playful smile. He wanted to see what other tricks Lu Langjun had up his sleeves. Seeing that many people were provoked, the manager of the grain store hurriedly lifted his clothes and crossed the threshold. His face was full of fear. He bowed to the crowd and the noise of the crowd finally calmed down a little. Folks, I'm running a small business. It's all thanks to your help that I can stand firm here in Zhou County. The shopkeeper was lying through his teeth, but the commoners liked to hear such flattering words. Their emotions were once again comforted. Who doesn't know how to say nice things? Do you guys have any food here? It wasn't easy for me to gather enough money to buy more. Why are you trying to limit the purchase? Are you trying to offend me on purpose? Someone in the crowd spoke up with an unreasonable attitude. The shopkeeper was so busy that his forehead was covered in hot sweat. He smiled bitterly and said, "My fellow villagers, your words are harsh. My store had originally set up this limit for the good of everyone. Why is it that in your mouth it's looking for trouble? Of course we have plenty of food. Then why did you set a purchase restriction? Do you still want to do business?" Before the shopkeeper could finish his words, he was interrupted by the voice again. At this time the crowd faintly sympathized with the shopkeeper. His service attitude was quite good and he was humble as well. Unfortunately, he had encountered someone with a bad temper. How pitiful was he now? "Of course we want to do business, but we can't not limit the purchase." The shopkeeper bowed again and said seriously, "Nowadays the world is not stable. Who doesn't want to fill their own rice tank to the brim? But recently the price of food has skyrocketed. My fellow villagers have also seen it. You know you're selling at a high price, but you don't know how to sell at a lower price. Who are you trying to fool?" Qiguan Rang listened to the conversation between the shopkeeper and the shill and almost laughed out loud. Lu Langjun was indeed a clever person. The other party even dared to use such a despicable method. The shopkeeper patted his chest and said to the crowd, "You can't say it like that. Who doesn't want to earn money when doing business?" The crowd listened quietly. The shopkeeper had already memorized the script in his heart and spoke passionately. "But business has its own rules. This kind of act of looting a burning house is not something that my store will stoop to. But why is it still marked at such a high price today? It's because we have no other choice. Everyone think about it. If my store continues to sell at a low price, will the villagers buy more? Or will the people who want to take the opportunity to make a fortune buy more? Yesterday my store and the other two stores sold a total of 2,000 dong. Sold for 2,000 dong? This business was not bad. Since there was so much surplus, why didn't they sell it or limit the purchase?" Everyone was confused, but some people already understood what was going on. They guessed that the 2,000 dong were most likely bought by those who wanted to store food and not by the people who really needed it. "If we continue to sell at this rate, in less than 7 or 8 days, our store's granary will be emptied." The shopkeeper's words sounded weak. Not to mention 7 or 8 days, they probably wouldn't even last for 2 or 3 days. The owner of the store thought about it and came up with the idea of limiting the purchase so that the people who really need it can buy it. After limiting the purchase, the price will be lower than it is now. No matter how many flowery words there were, they couldn't beat the phrase, "After limiting the purchase, the price will be lower than it is now." Nowadays the food in the store was indeed more expensive than usual, but it was much cheaper than the food that was 9 or 10 times more expensive. Many people could afford it if they gritted their teeth. With that, many people's hearts began to waver and they started to lean towards the store. The shopkeeper took the opportunity to add fuel to the fire and said in a clear voice, "My fellow villagers, although the world is difficult, with the blessings of God, we should have a small harvest this year. In another 2 or 3 months, you should start preparing for the autumn harvest. By then the food will have recovered and you won't have to worry about starvation." To be honest, the store doesn't make much money by limiting purchases. But if everyone can survive until then, earning less money doesn't matter. At the very least they would feel at ease. Don't you think that's the case? Business is business and business has its own principles. Qiguan Rang raised the feather fan in his hand to cover the smile on his face. Lu Longjuan's move was really beautiful. If it were anyone else, they would have been tortured to death by the restriction on the purchase. After all, this move had affected the interests of many people. Unfortunately, Lu Langjun was of noble birth. He was the only legitimate son of the second branch of the Lu family. As long as Lu Shi didn't fall, the gentry in Hejian County would be afraid of him. The restriction on the purchase made many black-hearted merchants eager to make a fortune. So what if they lost money? If they wanted to make a move on Lu Shi, they had to see if Lu Shi would agree. The business of the Lu family's grain store was still booming. There was an endless stream of people buying food. For them, even if they had to travel for a few more hours, it was all worth it as long as they could buy cheap food. This is what a real businessman should be like. Many people sincerely exclaimed, especially when they found out that the other grain stores didn't lower the price, but instead raised the price. They admired them even more. Lanting, this is what you call gaining both fame and fortune. Chapter 245. She smiled and said, "The timing, location and people are all on my side. It's mostly luck that I can succeed this time. Qiguan Rang nodded in agreement. It's really luck this time. If Lu Shi was not in the Luz but in Hu County, Jiang Pingji would have to go through a lot of trouble to succeed. Not to mention the brutal methods of assassination in ordinary business competitions, there were many other dirty methods to kill without spilling blood. Those who were greedy for money would have many ways to ruin her reputation. Even if Jiang Pingji had good intentions, if her opponents wanted to bully her, she would make a big fuss. It was impossible to implement the purchase restriction. The root cause was that the people were too easily fooled. They believed whatever they heard and rarely had the ability to make their own judgments. Based on this situation, the grain price won't be higher than the price set by the grain store. Jiang Pingji took a sip of tea and mumbled, I hope we can survive until the autumn harvest. That way the people won't have a large-scale food shortage. We can't let our guard down because of this. After all, the civil unrest in Meng County in Song Prefecture has spread to Hejian County and other counties. How to settle the people is a big problem. If they couldn't control the people, the local public security would be greatly reduced. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, That's the problem of the Hejian County chief and other aristocrats. It's not our turn to worry about it. Qiguan Rang choked. They were both commoners without any official titles. Why would they worry about such things? Jiang Pingji said, Compared to these things, Wenjing should think about how to be a bridegroom. Wei Nyangzi is still young, so please bear with her. Of course. Qiguan Rang's expression softened a little, revealing a sense of warmth. Jiang Pingji teased Qiguan Rang and the latter reacted accordingly. On the other side, the streaming room was a bit gloomy. Why? Because Jiang Pingji did not play by the rules. She traveled from the stars to ancient times to be a streamer, so she could be considered a time traveler, right? According to the usual plot of transmigration novels, as long as there was a decent man by her side, he would have a different kind of feeling for her. There could be only one male protagonist, but the friendly male supporting characters had to be from the second row to the third row. After watching the streaming for a few months, only a few men appeared and only a few of them were attractive. Qiguan Rang was getting married. Brainless smashing jar. I'm not happy. I thought that Qiguan Rang would be the streamer's CP. Sparks of love could be ignited between them. They usually get along quite well. I didn't expect that Qiguan Rang would really get married. It's so frustrating to choose the wrong CP. Hey Yida. I remember that Qiguan Rang is now married for the second time. How do you think he and the streamer are a good match? Cafeteria Daffin Auntie. #rested chin. Although I quite like this style, I feel that Qiguan Rang is not suitable for the streamer. Their personalities overlap in some areas and they are birds of a feather. They're more like bad friends. Moreover, the streamer is so young. That's right, although I don't know how old the host was in the past, she looks like she's 12 now. She'll only be 13 next year. Chun Lai. Starting from 3 years, the highest penalty is death. Raising a chestnut. 3 years of hard work, the death penalty is not a loss. Heart as clear as ice. #rested my chin on my hand. Although the lowly love of the uncle was not bad, I liked the childhood sweetheart even more. Jinyan Dejiba. I like Suku more. I don't mind the CP of a loyal dog and a Tsunder master. Zaguoj Chestnut. According to what you said, the young man named Hanyu is also not bad. He and the streamer are a happy quarrelsome CP. Even Lu Shi, a legitimate father, was not worried about his daughter's marriage. The viewers in the streaming room had already begun to dig up all kinds of men that Jiang Pingji had met, hoping to find Jiang Pingji's future husband from among them. Lao Siji Lianmeng. Why are you worrying so much? It's not certain whether the streamer will marry in the future. His words shocked everyone present. The viewers in the streaming room reacted one after another. According to Jiang Pingji's character, there was really no need to worry about that. Lao Siji Lianmeng. In my opinion, the men you mentioned are not a good match for the streamer. First of all, they are a few years older than the streamer. According to the ancient tradition of early marriage and early childbirth, when the streamer is 17 or 18 years old, they are either married or preparing for a second marriage after their wives pass away. Do you think the streamer will be a mistress or a second wife? The viewer's words made many people feel uncomfortable. Just thinking about that kind of scene was enough to make them feel sick. The streamer's excellence was obvious to all. Wasn't it because of Jiang Pingji's charm that many viewers followed her for so long? If even such a person had to be a mistress or a second wife, It would be like eating delicacies that had been left out overnight. Lao Ciji Lianming, the streamer still has a long way to go. It's too early to talk about relationships. The world is so big. There will be more outstanding people. Why should you limit your vision to a few people? Qiguan Rang will not be the streamer's CP. They will only be good friends. Although Jiang Pingji did not care about the bullet screen in the streaming room, Lao Ciji Lianming did win her heart. While paying attention to the bullet screen, she chatted happily with Qiguan Rang. Will Lanting go to Shangjing with Lu County Chief soon? Qiguan Rang suddenly brought up the topic and said regretfully, I thought I could invite Lanting to the wedding, but it seems that we are not fated to do so. Well, it's time to leave. The Mengs are going to investigate soon. Although I am confident that I am clean and did not leave any clues, it is hard to say that the Mengs will not suspect me. Jiang Pingji shook her head and said, not only that, my father and Mr. Wei Yuan have recommended me to study in Langyi. I will leave here sooner or later. But I can't be there for your wedding, but I will send the gift. It was time to go somewhere else to avoid the storm. Han Yu had said that Jiang Pingji would not be able to find anything if she went to Langyi County because Master Yuan Jing was going to take his students to Shangjing to participate in the evaluation. Lu Shi was the general evaluation officer of this year. Jiang Pingji would be going to Shangjing with him and she would meet Master Yuan Jing. Qiguan Rang sighed with emotion. I don't know when we can meet again. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, when I need you. They looked at each other and smiled. At that time, Qiguan Rang would also join them to make trouble. But before that, she had to find other talents. She couldn't rely on Su Ku alone. What if he got sick from exhaustion? Not to mention how furious the shopkeepers of the other grain shops in Hejin County were. After some publicity, the price of grain in Hejin County had gradually stabilized. Although it was still more expensive than usual, ordinary people could still afford it and their families would not starve to death. Chapter 246. My husband has just come back from the court meeting. How did he become like this? Feng Jin's mother heard from the servants that her husband Feng Ren had come back from the court meeting, so she hurried out of the main room to welcome him. With just one glance, she found that her husband was reprimanded in the court meeting and she felt sorry for him. If he was not reprimanded, how could a neatly dressed husband come back from the court meeting with tea stains on his forehead? There has been civil unrest in Meng County in Zhangzhou since a few months ago. Now that a letter has been sent to the palace, it is no wonder that the emperor is not angry. Feng Ren said carelessly. He took the handkerchief from his wife and wiped his face. He sighed and said, now the civil unrest is uncontrollable and it has spread to the counties near Zhangzhou. People are homeless and bandits are everywhere. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline are demanding an exorbitant price. Of course, the emperor wants to vent his anger. Madame Feng looked serious and said angrily, my husband is the head of the secretariat, but the emperor doesn't even give him face. If this gets out, how can he deter the other officials in the future? Not to mention the civil unrest of the Meng family in Zhangzhou. Those who are not deaf or blind would know something about it. Isn't it his own fault that the emperor only got the letter now? He just wants to vent his anger on my husband. Feng Ren snorted. He did not like what the emperor was doing at the moment. However, his wife had a bad temper and she was so protective of him. He felt warm in his heart. He could not help but raise his hand to hold Madame Feng's delicate and soft hands. I am fine. Madam, please don't get angry so easily. Anger hurts the liver. I am worried about you. Madame Feng glanced at Feng Ren and said angrily, you are going to have a family and a career. You are so old and you are still so improper. It has been so many years but you are still so shy. Makes me look bad. Feng Ren smiled gently and the couple went back to the main courtyard hand in hand. Madame Feng asked the servants to prepare hot soup so that Feng Ren could take a comfortable bath and change into a clean spring shirt. Alas, even so. Feng Ren sat in front of the table. His wife was holding an embroidery rod and was carefully embroidering a black plum blossom picture. Your behavior has indeed disappointed many officials. They are always having fun in Shangyang Palace and don't care about the outside world. Which emperor did not want to wield the power of the world and lie on the knees of beauties when drunk? Now the emperor of Dongqing had been practicing the latter. Shangyang Palace was a real harem with 3,000 beauties. His Majesty had also issued a palace order that all the women in the palace were not allowed to wear underwear so that he could have fun at any time. Every time Feng Ren entered the palace, he did not dare to take a second look, for fear that he would see something unsightly. If that was the case, it would have been fine, but the emperor just had to like to go to the homes of his ministers for a short visit. Who knew how many wives of his ministers had been fooled by him? It was absurd beyond compare. Compared to the previous emperor of Dongqing, Emperor Yang of Qing, it was no less frightening. He had ascended the throne for many years, but the number of times he attended court could be counted on one hand. Indulging in beauty, unable to extricate himself. Occasionally, Feng Ren also doubted whether he would die on a woman's belly because of his indulgence in lust. Although the aristocratic families were now in power, this had a lot to do with the emperor's indulgence in sensual pleasures and neglect of court affairs. The more power the aristocratic families had, the more they impeded the imperial power. The more the emperor could not enjoy the pleasure of ruling over the world. He was controlled everywhere, and the more he indulged in sensual pleasures, the less he cared about court affairs. And the more power the aristocratic families had, the more it was a vicious cycle. He was ambitious but did not like to manage court affairs. He wanted to suppress the aristocratic families and regain his power, but he did not have the ability. How could there be such a good thing in the world? The current emperor of Dongqing, other than having more sons than his brother and being able to sleep with several women at night, had nothing else to show. Feng Ren was calm. Even if he was called to the study room by the emperor and smashed a cup of tea, he could still chat with his wife calmly. Who cares? Madame Feng said carelessly, they have been crazy for a long time. Look at you, there's a cut on your forehead. Put some ointment on it and don't eat much for a few days in case there's a scar left after you recover. Other than the first emperor of Dongqing who had some achievements and ambition, the others were useless and useless. If it was not for the fact that the Feng family needed people in the imperial court, she would not want her husband to be the head of the secretariat. It was said that the emperor was dead and the aristocratic families were made of iron. No matter how bad the Feng family was, it would not be that bad. It did not matter if the royal family wanted to die or not. Her husband had written 4 or 5 memorials to remind the emperor about the Tsang prefecture in Meng County. However, the emperor was busy with his new favorite. If it was not for important matters, he did not want to see Feng Ren at all. The memorials he wrote 2 years ago were still gathering dust. Why would he read the memorials Feng Ren wrote a few months ago? Now he was angry? What was the use? I am worried about Huayu. He is now with the 4th prince. I don't know if he will run into mobs on the way. The children will have their own fortune. Don't you always say that? Why are you so worried when Erlang has only been away for a few months? Madame Feng put the embroidery cloth beside her and took out a sealed letter from the table. Huayu, you care too little about him. He took the letter and saw that it was written by Lu Shi. Feng Ren said. He only found out about Feng Jin's situation a few years ago. At that time, Feng Jin's character had already formed. He wanted to correct it but was afraid that it would backfire. He could only blame his wife for paying too much attention to the eldest son and loving the youngest son. They neglected the second son. Erlang is already at the age to start a family. Why are you more worried than me? What did Lu Feng write? Feng Ren read quickly. He lowered his eyebrows and smiled. Madam, you just laughed at me for being frivolous. Look at him. He is frivolous. He gave up his job as the county chief and came to be a matchmaker. Madame Feng did not avoid the topic. She picked up the letter and read it carefully. She had an idea. I have never heard of this lady from the Wei family. Feng Jin's brother had been engaged and it was his turn now. So Madame Feng had been looking for suitable ladies for the past 6 months. She was hesitating. I don't know what her temperament is. You can find out if you check. I am afraid that the lady that Lu Shi likes is not too bad. Feng Ren said, the Wei family in Hejian. Huayu can be a good match. If she has a good temperament and Huayu has no objection, she can be chosen. The Feng family was a big family. Feng Jin's brother was the eldest son of the legal wife. His wife would be the future wife of the family. Naturally, they had to carefully select her. Her family background, talent, and appearance must be good. But Feng Jin was the second son of the legal wife, so the requirements were not so strict. It was not that they did not treat Feng Jin well. They were afraid that sisters-in-law with similar status would easily have thoughts that they should not have, which would not be good for the family. Therefore, the status of Feng Jin's wife was not important. They valued her character, talent, and temperament more. If there was a shrewd and ambitious woman who instigated Feng Jin and his brother to fight for the family property, it would not work. Chapter 247. Lu Shi and Feng Ren were friends of gentlemen and they had a good relationship in private. They usually talked about their literary ideals and political affairs. They rarely talked about their work. This kind of friendship and the way they got along with each other made Feng Ren feel relaxed. Naturally, their relationship was not bad. My husband always said that Lu County Chief was an idiot. I believe it now. Madame Feng put the letter away with a smile. Although it was an encrypted letter, there was nothing shameful in it. It was nothing more than talking about daily life, describing what had happened in the past few years, expressing his longing and acting as a matchmaker. He talked about how he was about to leave for Shangjing and didn't have a place to stay. He asked Feng Ren to help him arrange a place so that he wouldn't have to sleep in the open. The content was humorous. It didn't sound like the tone of the famous Lu County Chief at all. It sounded more like a boy who hadn't grown up. He's even more idiotic. Feng Ren opened his mouth but he suddenly thought of something and stopped. He said vaguely, "Anyway, you can't just judge a person by his appearance. He looks beautiful but inside he's a pervert." Feng Ren and his wife had been married for many years and their relationship was getting better and better. They talked for a while and got up to have dinner together. At the same time, the news that Feng Ren, the head of the secretariat, was reprimanded by the emperor and even smashed a teacup had spread to all the families in Shangjing. Those with ordinary family backgrounds felt insecure. Those with great power in the court just looked on coldly. They all thought that Feng Ren would be angry and stay at home for a few days after being wronged. They didn't know that he still did what he was supposed to do the next day. Except for the mark on his forehead, there was no difference. Some old officials who were clear-minded couldn't help but sigh when they saw it. The emperor had completely offended Feng Ren. So what if he was the head of the secretariat? There were countless high-ranking officials in the Feng family. Would they care about the position of the head of the secretariat? It seemed to be an important position, but in fact, the emperor was always afraid of Feng Ren and the Feng family. Under such circumstances, how could they expect the Feng family to serve the country wholeheartedly? Feng Ren didn't get angry not because he had a good temper, but because it wasn't worth getting angry. Due to the civil unrest in Meng County of Tsong Prefecture, the surrounding counties were affected as well. The people were wailing in pain and suffering. Along the way, people in ragged clothes could be seen everywhere. Many of the refugees from Meng County had fled to other counties with their children, creating a huge security and public order problem for the local area. The roving bandits took the opportunity to wreak havoc, burning, killing, and looting. In such a big environment, Hejian County seemed to be exceptionally peaceful. Most of the bandits had been cleaned up by Jiang Pingji. She selected some of them and incorporated them. Not only did they not become a hidden danger, but they contributed to the peace around Hejian County. While other places were immersed in dark clouds, this place seemed peaceful. The purchase restriction in the grain store was carried out smoothly. The other gentry families in Hejian County didn't dare to vent their anger when they saw that the leader was from the Lu family. What was more surprising was that the grain store of the Wei family also took the initiative to adjust the policy and limited the people's purchase at a low price. At least they know how to return the favor. Lu Shi smiled faintly when he heard the news. Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and asked, "Did father really step forward to be a matchmaker for Jing'er and Huayu?" Lu Shi snorted. What else? If they didn't have such a handsome son-in-law, how could the Wei family be so generous? When Jiang Pingji implemented the purchase restriction, although the Wei family didn't kick them when they were down, they were just watching from the sidelines. Now that Jiang Pingji had introduced the purchase restriction, no one would believe it if they didn't have a secret deal. If that's the case, I'm relieved. Huayu is a noble person. He will treat Xian well. Jiang Pingji didn't think too much about it. Wei Jingxian marrying Feng Jin was better than marrying Wu Majun, wasn't it? Other things aside, Feng Jin's character was still trustworthy. Lu Shi secretly shook his head. His daughter was so kind. Based on the current situation, the marriage between Feng Jin and Wei Jingxian seemed to be perfect. But in the future, his daughter might have to bear double the pain. But it was too early to say that. Who knew what the future would be like? Lu Shi skipped the topic and said to Jiang Pingji, "It will be the autumn harvest in a month and I will be going to Shangjing to meet the emperor. Ask your aunt to prepare the things you will need on the way." It's your first time going out, so you should be well prepared. Okay. Lu Shi said, pick some of the troops to follow us and protect us on the way. The rest will stay in Hejian County. Jiang Pingji's troops had expanded to 1,500 people, and that was the result of her careful selection. She couldn't take all 1,500 people with her. At most she could take 40 to 50 people with her. The rest had to stay where they were. Jiang Pingji nodded. In fact, she didn't want to expose all of them. The quality of the troops varied. Everyone needed to be polished and trained. Even if Lu Shi didn't say so, she would do it anyway. Father, don't worry. I have asked Xiaoyu to pick suitable followers. The rest will stay in Hejian County for now. Wenjing will take care of them. Although Qiguan Rang hadn't officially joined the team, Jiang Pingji didn't want to waste such a good labor force. Su definitely couldn't stay, but Meng Hun still couldn't manage a troop of 1,000 people neatly. After all, internal affairs weren't his strong point. Besides, his current identity was a little sensitive, and he needed to avoid the Mengs. Most of the time he couldn't appear openly. Fortunately, Qiguan Rang would stay in Hejian County. He could more or less take over Suke's work, so she didn't have to worry about the troops. Although the departure would take more than a month, the preparations had already begun. In the ancient times, when transportation and information were not developed, it was not easy to travel far. Jiang Pingji habitually broadcast every day. Because the content was monotonous and boring, she didn't meet any interesting people or things. Most of the time, it was the audience who entertained themselves with the bullet screen. Jiang Pingji sometimes read the bullet screen to kill time. Unknowingly, the autumn harvest was approaching. The fields were yellow and farmers and tenants were working everywhere. The purchase restriction that had lasted for 2 months had also come to an end, and the price of grain had returned to normal. The stone that had been pressing down on everyone's hearts had finally been removed. From the adults to the children, everyone revealed a relaxed and happy smile, temporarily forgetting the chaos in the outside world. The number of the troops stabilized at 1,500 people. Their main task was to train. Occasionally they would have other additional tasks. For example, farm work. Because the civil unrest hadn't been effectively controlled, the outside world was still relatively chaotic. People were rushing to harvest the grain. They were afraid that the harvest would be ruined if they were late. However, every household was understaffed, so the harvest was not fast. Jiang Pingji happened to hear the tenants talking about it. After discussing with Suku, they decided to rent out all the troops to do farm work. They were strong, hardworking, and they only needed to eat their fill every day. Suku was speechless. He really didn't want to say that he knew this handsome Lang Jun. Chapter 248. Lang Jun, you mustn't. Suku moved quickly, intending to stop Jiang Pingji, who wanted to help. It was not that he thought she was a noble person and could not work like a farmer, but that he was busy enough and did not want to add to the mess. Jiang Pingji turned her head and asked Suku in confusion, "Why are you stopping me? There are no monsters in the fields." At that moment, the audience in the streaming room had started to become teachers, teaching Jiang Pingji how to do farm work. Even if she did not know how to do it before, she could now follow the guide given by her friends in the streaming room. Suku was looking down on her. Suku was speechless. After a while he said, "Lang Jun, you are a noble person. How can you work like a peasant?" Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at him with a faint look in her eyes. "Speak like a human." Suku's face turned green. After a while he said, "We are busy with the autumn harvest. Lang Jun, don't add to the mess." Jiang Pingji was speechless. She did not want to look at the ha-ha-ha on the streaming screen. In the past it was always Suku who felt sorry for him. This time it was her turn to feel sorry for him. Lao Siji Lianming, light a candle for this honest boy. He actually said that. Swizhen Beishijing, I was drinking and almost choked. Suku was looking for trouble. Even if he thought that, he could not say it out loud. I think the streamer's expression is about to change. Hey young man, you have to be careful. He is going to make things difficult for you. Mo Wu Huashi, #propping chin. Suku is not following the routine. According to the usual routine, he should be secretly moved. After all, the streamer was willing to put down her pride and work in the fields. It was a necessary quality for a wise ruler, but he actually despised the streamer. Yun Qimao, do any of you remember the streamer's background? Speaking of which, did she still see crops in her era? I really wonder if the streamer knew which were grains and which were straws. Jiang Pingji was shot in the knee. She had indeed never seen real crops. It was like the audience in the streaming room had never seen a pig run, but they had eaten pork. But they could not look down on her knowledge just because of that, okay? Host V, don't you have the bullet screen to guide us? Lao Ciji Lianming, most of them are from Baidu. I don't know if they are useful. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Nai Bao Bao, actually I'm curious. Agriculture still existed in the host's era, right? Fully automatic machines are used for harvesting. Jiang Pingji stared at Su Ku silently, but he didn't budge. She squatted on the ridge of the field and looked at the farmers who were working. Looked like he was defeated, but he was actually chatting with the audience in the live broadcast room. Host V, do you know what it means to be a farmer in my time? 2 words, rich. The viewers in the live stream room expressed their shock and sent a series of exclamation marks. How much money can you make from farming? Jiang Pingji thought about it and used a very vivid metaphor to give them a general idea. Host V, all of you have seen the Great Universal Geographical Map of Dongqing, right? You know the approximate size of this country. The audience in the live streaming room expressed that they knew about it. After all, the Great Geographical Map of Dongqing was hanging in her study room. It was hard not to see it. In terms of land area, it was about 1/6 of their era's Hua nation and slightly larger. This was the result of a data guru in the live broadcast room after combining the various data provided by the host. And then, Host V, it looks like a large land area, but it's about the size of a small or medium-sized farm. In other words, the land area of the Emperor of Dongqing is less than that of a small or medium-sized farm owner in her time. The audience in the live streaming room, Lao Ciji Lianming, I may have drunk fake wine and watched fake live streams. I suddenly can't look at the term farm owner. Xiao Gui, can't look at it directly +1. I suddenly feel that my family's rural household is suddenly much more lofty. Moonlight treasure box, can't look at it directly +2. The urban household is trembling. A farm that was 1/6 of the land area of Hua Nation was completely unimaginable. However, would a farm owner be able to manage such a large farm? He should be able to, right? But they couldn't imagine what it would be like. Lao Ciji Lianming, wait a minute. I seem to have analyzed a very scary fact. If there were such large farms in the host's time, obviously the earth could no longer meet the needs of the farm owners. Would there be the existence of agricultural planets? In other words, the host's time was already interstellar. Just like what many interstellar novels imagined, there were many planets in the universe that were suitable for the survival of living creatures. Some planets were specially divided for farming, which gave rise to such terrifying farm owners. The audience in the live streaming room were all excited after being reminded by him. Jiang Pingji didn't know what they were excited about. She quietly looked at the 2 or 3 tenant farmers who were working together on a piece of land. The audience in the live streaming room couldn't imagine how the farm owners in her time managed such a large farm as Dongqing because they had never seen it with their own eyes. Jiang Pingji hadn't seen the autumn harvest with her own eyes, so she couldn't imagine how the farmers harvested the grain. Suka saw that Jiang Pingji was so quiet and he felt anxious. He changed his words and said, if you're really curious, you should get a tenant farmer who is familiar with the field to guide you. The grain seems to be nothing, but if it's harvested improperly, it can easily cause lumbar muscle strain and scratches on the hands and feet. Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at him. Then go find a tenant farmer. The audience in the live streaming room could only copy and paste on Baidu. They were no better than her. Suku had no choice but to get up and find an experienced tenant farmer. He hoped that his Langjun would know the difficulty and stop tormenting herself. Why don't you use tools? Jiang Pingji's understanding of the ancient times was limited. Even if she came to this era and searched for information from books in the outside world, she still needed to see many things with her own eyes. She didn't have the actual objects in her mind, so she couldn't imagine it. The old tenant farmer was in fear and trepidation. Langjun, there are farming tools, but they are rare and the cattle are precious. Usually 3 or 4 households share them. When one household finishes harvesting, it's the next one's turn. If they are experienced, their speed isn't slow. In fact, it relied more on manpower than the power of tools. Jiang Pingji followed the direction of the old tenant farmer's finger and saw a farmer using rough farming tools. She frowned slightly. She couldn't imagine using manpower to harvest the grain. Not to mention the big farm owners, even the small farm owners wouldn't be able to harvest all the grain in their lifetime. Chapter 249. Old man, please teach me how to do it. I'll learn. Jiang Pingji smiled. She rolled the wide hem up to her knees and secured it with a rope, revealing a pair of slender white calves. As for the sleeves, she tied them up with a rope to make it easier for her to walk. Xiao Gui. The rope to secure the sleeves looks like it's from Japan. Lao Ciji Lianming. Sleeves, also known as arm ropes. They're not from Japan. In fact, people in ancient China used ropes to secure sleeves so that they wouldn't get in the way of their work. But no one was wearing a robe with wide sleeves, so they didn't need it. While he was being taught a lesson, Jiang Pingji secured the sleeves with Su Ke's help. She stood beside the old tenant farmer and listened attentively to him teaching her how to harvest the grains. After all, the old tenant farmer had worked in the fields his whole life, so he was very experienced. Although he was old and had gray hair on his temples, he was no slower than the young men. He was even faster than them. At that moment, Su Ke keenly sensed that his Langjuan's mood was a bit weird. He thought to himself, does Langjun think it's too difficult? However, the scene that followed refreshed his worldview and limits. Langjun, who was thought to be inattentive, only needed to watch it once. The old tenant farmer told her some things to pay attention to, and she was able to do it by herself. Langjun, you're really smart. You're much smarter than my grandson. The old tenant farmer was so happy that he complimented her, but he realized he had said something wrong after he finished. How could they compare the status of his grandson and the Langjun in front of him? If his grandson couldn't learn this skill, he would probably starve to death. Langjun, on the other hand, could live a luxurious life even though she didn't know what the grains looked like. When he thought of this, the old tenant farmer was so scared that his legs trembled. His face turned pale and he almost fell to his knees. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji revealed a very happy smile and spoke to him in a gentle and soft voice. It's not hard to see, but you need to pay attention to your posture and strength. Otherwise, your whole body will hurt. The old tenant farmer didn't know how to control his posture and strength, but he had accumulated a lifetime's worth of experience. Su Ke stood to the side and his face turned slightly better. Jiang Pingji didn't seem to realize that the old tenant farmer had said something offensive. Instead, she quickly harvested the rest of the rice. A quarter of an hour later, she sat on the ridge of the field, swinging her two slender white legs. Her forehead was faintly covered in a thin layer of sweat. Langjun, do you want to apply some medicine? Su Ke held a small brown bottle in his hand, which contained a plaster that could remove blood stasis and stop bleeding. Jiang Pingji looked at his hand, then looked at her calves and feet, which were scratched by the grains and foreign objects. She understood and shook her head. She pointed to the seat beside her and gestured for him to sit down. That old farmer didn't mean to offend you. Su Ke was sensitive to other people's emotions and he had a better understanding of his Langjun. He knew that she was not in a good mood. No matter how he thought about it, it seemed like the old tenant farmer's words were the only thing that offended him and made him unhappy. However, Su Ke was wrong this time. Jiang Pingji had many flaws. She was capricious, arrogant, and unruly. It seemed to be a common failing of the aristocratic families in this era. However, Jiang Pingji was different from those people. She would not hurt the weak and innocent, not to mention that the old farmer had no ill intentions. Are you pleading on behalf of someone else? Jiang Pingji couldn't help but laugh. She said, Xiaoyu, the premise of pleading is that you have to understand the whole story and know the truth. Otherwise, not only will your pleading fail, but it will also add fuel to the fire. I am not angry because of that, Su Ke said seriously, but you are indeed not in a good mood. Jiang Pingji smiled and asked him in return, then do you know why I am not happy? Su Ke was dumbfounded. He even suspected that it was not that she was in a bad mood, but that she was simply using this as a pretext to torment him. Su Ke cupped his hands in front of his chest. His cheeks were slightly red. I don't understand. Please enlighten me. Jiang Pingji did not answer his question. Instead, she asked, do you think I was a burden when I harvested the grains? Su Ke was speechless. Sure enough, it was directed at him. Before Su Ke could recover from his confusion, Jiang Pingji continued, don't think that I look fine now. In fact, my back is aching. Farm work is not something that can be done with strength. If you don't know how to save energy, your muscles will definitely swell and your whole body will ache. Su Ke listened to her quietly and looked at her profile. To be honest, he always felt that his Longjuan's face was a bit too delicate, like a girl's. But that was the trend nowadays. Men had to put on incense, put on flowers and dress gorgeously when they went out. A group of enchanting bitches. It was normal for her Langjun to look delicate. After all, she was still young and it was hard to distinguish her gender. When she got older, the difference would be huge. It's too hard. Jiang Pingji's current physical fitness was trash in her eyes, but compared to her peers and even adult men, she was a crane in a flock of chickens. With such fitness, she actually felt a bit tired after working for 15 minutes on the farm. She felt that it was not worth it. The hard work and the results were completely disproportionate. But even though she thought that way, the others felt that she was very capable and had a high level of understanding. She was no worse than the experienced tenants. They were not from the same era, so there was a huge gap in their thinking. Langjun, you don't have to work so hard, Su Ke said. Her identity was different from those tenants. The latter needed to rely on the land, but she did not have to do anything to live a luxurious life. You're wrong to think that way. Jiang Pingji clasped her fingers together and rested her elbows on her knees. I personally went down to the fields to experience it. Only then did I feel that the tenants are working hard. The hard work and sweat of the people are not equal to their harvest. Su Ke was secretly surprised. There were many things that were not equal in this world. If every household had access to more advanced farming tools, it wouldn't take much effort to reap an acre of land without breaking a sweat, and it would increase efficiency. Jiang Pingji murmured. The ideas she had in her head couldn't be implemented in this world. She had to compromise and come up with other ideas. A field that would normally take 2 hours to reap can be done in half a cup of tea's time. Su Ke was speechless. Did she go crazy from working in the fields? I need to go back and think about it. You'll be responsible for the things here. Whoever dares to slack off will be drilled to death by the head instructor. Jiang Pingji seemed to have an idea. She got up and put on the wooden clogs, ignoring Su Ke. Su Ke was speechless. Hey, don't stop halfway through. It's so uncomfortable to keep me in suspense. He reached out his hand, but his Langjun walked like he was flying. He could walk in the fields with those wooden clogs as if he was walking on flat ground. Chapter 250. What are you drawing, Langjun? Taksha stroked her long sleeves with one hand and ground an ink block with the other. The air was filled with the fragrance of ink. Jiang Pingji dipped the brush in the ink and started writing on the bamboo paper. The ink lines of different thicknesses were arranged in picturesque disorder on the drawing paper. In a short while, a strange picture was formed. However, no matter how Taksha looked at it, she could not tell what it was. Something useful. Jiang Pingji drew a book from the shelf halfway through. She opened it and read it carefully. Then she sat back at the table and started to make changes on the drawing paper. If it's feasible, it might be of great use. Jiang Pingji wanted to improve the farming tools and use external help to improve work efficiency and save manpower. If she was asked to toss about problems such as mechanical design or aircraft carrier energy core, her academic level would definitely not be able to handle it. However, if it was just designing simple wooden machinery, the difficulty would be greatly reduced. Not to mention, the audience in the live broadcast room could also provide her with friendly reference materials. Therefore, it was not difficult for her to improve the farming tools. The real difficulty was that the tools had to be in line with the current level of technology. She also had to manufacture the tools that she designed. At the same time, she had to consider the cost and maintenance issues. At least, the time and manpower needed to manufacture the tools could not be more than the resources that could be saved by using the tools. Jiang Pingji continued to paint while Taksha stared at her with a confused face. As Lu Shi's personal maid, she had read some books. He was good at writing, but that was all. Nowadays, paintings were more about the artistic conception than the real scene. It was abstract and had meaning. Taksha naturally did not understand three-dimensional paintings. She guessed that no one could understand what she was drawing except for Jiang Pingji and the audience in the streaming room. Langjun, it must be very important. Taksha nodded and continued to grind the ink for Jiang Pingji. After a while, she saw that Jiang Pingji had finally stopped. She asked in a low voice, Langjun, do you need some hot soup to cleanse yourself? Jiang Pingji rode a horse back to the mansion after finishing the farm work. Her calves were exposed and there were mud stains on them. Her sleeves were stained and she was sweating. If the gatekeeper did not recognize her face, he would not have let her in. Just based on her previous appearance, people would believe it if they said that she was a tenant farmer of some family. Yes, go and prepare a set of clean clothes. If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't have realized it. I do feel a little uncomfortable. Jiang Pingji was not a clean freak. After all, she was a genetic warrior in her previous life. When she carried out missions assigned by her superiors, what kind of harsh environment had she not encountered? Not to mention getting half of their bodies covered in mud, it was common for them to be stained with the enemy's blood, flesh, and filth. But now that the conditions allowed it, she didn't like to mistreat herself. Jiang Pingji temporarily turned off the live stream and took a shower. She wore a green Confucian robe and sat in front of the table. Her long hair was still damp. Turning on the live broadcast again, her gaze fell on the drawing paper on the desk. Her brows furrowed imperceptibly before relaxing. Why haven't I seen Xuanmei recently? Jiang Pingji dried her wet hair with a towel in one hand and continued to make changes on the drawing paper with the other. Taksha continued to grind and said, Xuanmei has been keeping watch at night recently. Lang Jun sleeps early, so he naturally did not see her. Why do you want to see her? Oh, Jiang Pingji said, I just remembered something. Didn't I decide to go to Shangjing with my father? Both of you plan to bring only one of them. It's a long journey and little girls can't take it. So I want to ask if you are willing to follow me. Taksha giggled. Lang Jun, you've forgotten about yourself. You've suffered, let alone me and Xuanmei. Since I'm Long Juan's maid, I'll follow you wherever you go. There's no reason for me to be unwilling to go. Xuanmei would say the same thing if you asked her. But why do you want me and Xuanmei to stay at home? Jiang Pingji shook her head and answered directly, I'm going to study, not to seek pleasure. I don't need too many people to serve me. Even so, you can't mistreat yourself. Taksha looked at her with hope. I won't follow you. Jiang Pingji did not agree immediately. She only said that she would ask for Xuanmei's opinion. Due to the elimination of some stubborn and cruel bandits, the autumn harvest in Hejian County was relatively peaceful. Plus, there was a small bumper harvest, so there was more or less some surplus grain. Jiang Pingji asked Su Ku to calculate the money earned from the few thousand dawn of grain and then purchase grain elsewhere at a lower price. Going back and forth, the original 5,000 dawn of grain could be multiplied. With the grain, Jiang Pingji, the poor person, had a slightly fuller purse. Su Ku was becoming more and more like a meticulous housekeeper. His abacus was crackling and he could split a penny into two. There was still a lot of room for the grain they earned. He said that it was all because of his Lang Jun. Before leaving, Jiang Pingji climbed over the wall and left the manor. She climbed over Wei Yuan's wall again to look for Qiguan Rang. Qiguan Rang, who almost thought that it was a night attack, was speechless. He pulled his cloak together and took a drawing from Jiang Pingji. There was a drawing of a strange object on it. It's an improved farming tool. Jiang Pingji took a sip of tea. But I have too little experience. This kind of imaginary thing can't achieve the desired effect. I'm handing this over to you. I've also talked to the carpentry workshop in the Lu Manor. You can discuss with the carpentry workshop about how to make it into a usable object. Qiguan Rang listened to her in shock. He suddenly thought of the improved crossbow and was speechless. If Lang Jun can solve this problem, you may become a person who is not inferior to the Mahists. It was a pity that Lu Shi's talent was not limited to farming but to the world. Jiang Pingji ignored his words and continued, do it in private. Don't let anyone know. Qiguan Rang was from this era, so he understood the pros and cons of it. He cupped his hands and said, don't worry, Lanting. Jiang Pingji said, okay, thank you. Qiguan Rang was smart and suspicious. Jiang Pingji climbed over the wall to look for him in the middle of the night, and it was the night before they left. He put away the drawing and asked, Lang Jun, do you suspect that there's something wrong with you? Yes. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji answered the question. But that's not the main reason. It's just one of the reasons. The other reason is that it's convenient for Wenjing to stay in Hejian. I'll be in Langyi for a while, so I won't be able to take care of him. Then. Chapter 251. The next day before dawn, 4 carriages quietly left the city under the protection of 50 guards. Although the real owners were Lu Shi and his father, they had prepared 4 carriages. Lu Shi had one carriage, Jiang Pingji had another, and the respectable servants had another. The last carriage was filled with miscellaneous items such as clothes, food, clean water, money, and other items to keep warm. The parcels of the entourage and guards were also placed in that carriage. That was after several reductions. According to what the second lady and madam who had prepared, there would have been at least 6 carriages. To put it simply, it was not easy to go on a long journey in ancient times when all aspects of living conditions were abnormally backward. The viewers in the streaming room were shocked and learned something new. Jun Muyi. When I watched TV series, I felt that the actors and actresses were all light and simple when they went out. They basically brought a servant girl and a manservant. So, those were fake TV series. The streamer's extravagance is the correct way to go out in ancient times? Jinghong Yulong. Tisk, it's really an entourage. So awesome. I feel that the streamer didn't suffer a loss on this trip. Many viewers were very envious. They wished they could experience such luxurious treatment for the streamer. Of course, there were some who were more rational. Lao Siji Lianming. So jealous. Can you believe the TV series? Do you know how undeveloped transportation was in ancient times? Not only transportation but even the roads were the same. Things like courier stations could not be everywhere. It was common to not see a single living person for 3 to 5 days after a long journey. There were no villages and no shops. Without enough food and water, were they going to starve or die of thirst? Those who had the means to travel far would naturally consider all aspects and take into consideration any unexpected situations. Those who did not have the means could only carry a parcel and some dry food. Everything was light and simple. Not only was the speed slow, but they would also encounter all kinds of dangers along the way. The ancient world was not like the modern world that the audience was living in. There were many tall buildings in the modern world, which greatly reduced the living space of wild animals. Many people had eaten pork, but they had never seen a pig run. However, the ancient world was different. There were dangerous animals running around, and snakes often visited homes. Shaggy Gongji. No, did the person above eat dynamite today? I was just envious. Do you have to be so angry? The bullet screen in the streaming room was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Jiang Pingji did not care. She leaned half of her body on the table and rested. They hadn't left Hejian County yet, so the vibration of the carriage was still within an acceptable range. However, as it was approaching noon, the carriage jolted violently. The audience in the livestream room wondered if the carriage would break apart from the jolting. Jinghong Wandering Dragon. All of a sudden, I'm not envious anymore. I can endure it for a while, but after a while my bones will be shattered. There were even some audience members who said that the camera was shaking so much that their eyes hurt and they felt a little nauseous. He's already on the main road? Jiang Pingji lifted her hand and lifted the curtain of the carriage. The scenery outside had already turned into a rustling autumn scene. Taxi did not sit in the third carriage. Instead, she followed Jiang Pingji. Judging from the time, we should have left the official road by now. Your servant has prepared a cushion so that you won't feel uncomfortable from the bumps. Why was the traffic in ancient times so blocked? Outdated transportation was one of the reasons. Another important reason was that the roads in this era were not good. Apart from the smoothness and spaciousness of the official road, there wasn't even a road anywhere else. The Lu Mansion's carriage had a more advanced shock absorption system, but it was still so bumpy, let alone an ordinary carriage. No need. I'm going out to ride for a while. Jiang Pingji's physical fitness was excellent, but such a bumpy carriage was too much for her, let alone the frail ancient people. Lu Shi was speechless when he saw Jiang Pingji riding on a tall horse. Naughty girl, be careful on the horse, he reminded her. Riding in a carriage was actually more uncomfortable than riding a horse. He thought that his daughter had gotten off because she couldn't stand the bumps. Okay. Jiang Pingji rode the horse and followed the carriages leisurely. The sun gradually rose in the sky and shone on her body, making her feel warm. It was not convenient to travel in ancient times. Fortunately, Lu Shi was experienced and had prepared everything he could. Lu Shi lifted the curtain of the carriage and said to Jiang Pingji, "Let's stop and rest for a while. Eat something." Jiang Pingji responded and informed the carriages to rest in place. Everyone had something to eat before they continued their journey. "Xiao, look at your face. Are you sick?" When Suke got off the carriage, his pale face caught her attention. "Look at his lips, they've turned deathly pale. At this moment Suku felt that his whole body was about to fall apart. His legs gave way and he almost knelt on the ground. In such a difficult situation, his Longjuan's teasing laughter rang in his ears, making him feel even more hopeless. It took him a long time to straighten his back. Suku managed to maintain his elegance and smiled at Jiang Pingji. But the smile was very forced. Set up a campfire over there and boil some water to cook jerky. You can drink some later. If the carriage is too bumpy, you can ride a horse. Jiang Pingji was not worried that Suku did not know how to ride a horse. The 6 arts of gentlemen were skills that all students in that era had to master. Suku cupped his hands and thanked her. Thank you, Langjun. What are you thanking me for? Didn't you ask for it? Jiang Pingji looked him up and down with teasing eyes and said in a low voice, Xuanmei went to see you yesterday, right? Alas, if you weren't a blockhead and didn't understand a girl's mind, you would still have a beautiful companion. Suku's face turned pale and then green. He hurriedly said, Langjun, don't misunderstand. Xuanmei is not. In a rich family, the Longjuan's personal maids were mostly concubines. How could Suku dare to think about it? Why are you in such a hurry? Jiang Pingji approached him and sneered. Xuanmei came back with red eyes. Suku kept his mouth shut. I treat her like my own sister. I don't have any other thoughts. Plus, Xuanmei has her own thoughts. She may not be willing to be a concubine of a rich family. She likes you very much. Jiang Pingji opened her mouth and Suku lowered his head. What do you think? Ku rejected Xuanmei. Suku's voice was as soft as a mosquito. His cheeks were slightly red. Actually, I don't think Xuanmei's choice is a good one. You are not a good match. Suku was not good at the moment, but he had a bright future. Jiang Pingji was confident in Suku and herself. There were too few men in that era who had their original intentions. Chapter 252. Jiang Pingji crossed her arms and leaned against the side of the carriage. Suku felt more and more uncomfortable. He didn't even know where to put his hands. But that girl is quite silly and stubborn. You should know why she chose to stay in Hejian County, right? Suku didn't say anything. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know at first, but since his Langjun said so, he naturally understood. She stayed in Hejian County to take care of his aunt. Xuanmei's character was like her name. She was gentle and very kind. It seems that you understand. Jiang Pingji patted his shoulder and whispered with a smile. If you like Xuanmei, remember to come to me and ask for her hand in marriage. If you don't like her, you should make up your mind as soon as possible. Don't waste her time. Suku smiled helplessly. His Longjuan's temperament was too unexpected. The audience in the streaming room witnessed the whole conversation. Many people who liked the master-servant couple expressed their heartache. Streamer, you are not a qualified woman from another world. Do you understand? Also, when did Xuanmei and Suku hook up? I understand. Suku cupped his hands in front of his chest and kept his head down. Only his exposed ears were slightly red. After a short rest and a full meal, they continued their journey. The surrounding environment became more dangerous after leaving Hejian County. Not only did they have to face man-made harm, but they also had to guard against natural disasters. The distance between each relay station wasn't fixed. Sometimes it would only take half a day to travel from one relay station to the next, while other times, it would take 3 to 4 days. Fortunately, the carriages were equipped with enough rice and water, so the 50 people in the caravan didn't have to worry too much. The journey was very boring. After 5 or 6 days, even the weak Suku gradually got used to the bumpy carriage. Although he was still pale, he was much better than before. In comparison, his ability to adapt was not as good as Takshu, a girl from the inner yard. Under such circumstances, the content of the live stream in the streaming room for the past few days was naturally boring. Having seen the scene of traveling in ancient times with their own eyes, they did not envy Jiang Pingji for being able to travel so majestically and ostentatiously. It was simply suffering. Bingtang Lemon, I was quite envious, but now I only feel sorry for her. I lived on the grasslands and rode a horse before. I know how tiring it is to ride a horse for a long time. Looking at the road, I can imagine how bumpy it is inside the carriage. In short, modern society is better. Tianxia Wudi, all of you are staring at the streamer and the carriage. Am I the only one who feels sorry for the guard who has to walk? I counted and found that each of them had worn out 7 or 8 pairs of straw sandals. While we were resting, I saw someone sitting on the ground and picking the blisters on his feet. Nidita, you've hit the nail on the head. When I first entered the streaming room, I was wondering why every guard had a string of straw sandals hanging on their shoulders. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that they were weaving straw sandals to sell. Now that I understand, I just feel sad. Lao Ciji Lianmeng. I remember when I was in high school, the school organized an excursion in the 3rd year of high school. The whole grade had to walk up and down the mountain on their feet. It was about 20 kilometers. Many people couldn't recover for a week. Over the past few days, these guards had traveled a lot more than they had traveled on foot. They even had to take turns to keep watch at night. A group of people sleeping in the wilderness. The conditions were really tough. Thinking about himself, as long as he had a card or a mobile phone, he could go on an excursion at any time. But in ancient times, it was almost impossible. The water in the water bag is finished. I don't know if there is a water source nearby. Lucy took a bite of the dry, hard cake. There was no taste in his mouth. The water bag in his hand was empty. The guards sat in 2s and 3s. They seemed relaxed, but in fact they were secretly vigilant of their surroundings. I'll ask someone to look for it. Father, go rest in the carriage. Jiang Pingji took the water bag from him and selected a few guards who were in good condition to look for a clean water source. She could choose not to go, but when it came to survival in the wilderness, no one had more experience than she did. She could find water as fast as possible and avoid the dangers lurking in the forest. Her efficiency was unquestionable. Everyone had a few water bags with them. If they drank a little at a time, they could probably last until the next station. Jiang Pingji had a long knife on her waist. The blade was straight and sharp. If it weren't for her delicate face and short stature, she would have looked valiant and heroic. She raised her hand and chopped the bushes around her with the knife, clearing a relatively clear path. There's a stream half a mile ahead. Jiang Pingji said with certainty. It's not winter now. Snakes, insects, rats and ants are active. Before she finished her sentence, she suddenly turned her wrist and held the black knife in a backhand grip. The blade and the sword deeply pierced into the tree trunk behind a guard. The guard was so scared that his body stiffened. His forehead was covered in cold sweat and he didn't dare to move. Because she had walked a lot, her breathing was a little heavy. It's a poisonous snake. She pulled out the knife with a clang. At that moment, everyone realized that the tip of the knife was stained with blood. A poisonous snake with a triangular head and a brown body was nailed to the tree trunk. It was still in the posture of exerting force before it died. If it weren't for Jiang Pingji's quick action, the snake's poisonous fangs would have bitten the guard's neck. Be careful. Jiang Pingji put away the knife. Her expression was still cold, but it gave people an indescribable sense of security. After stumbling for another half a mile, they heard the sound of flowing water. The troops looked at her with awe and admiration. Go get some water. Hurry up. Jiang Pingji stood on a huge rock by the stream and looked into the distance. She didn't find anything unusual. The guards heard her and immediately took down the water bags hanging on their bodies. They squatted by the water and filled it with water. Sans Hisong Shuningsher. The ancient water source is not polluted. It looks really clean. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan. It looks clean, but it doesn't mean it's really clean. If you drink it directly, you might get diarrhea. Who knows how many microorganisms are in it? If you drink it, you might be infected by parasites. I think it's safer to boil it first. Jiang Pingji wouldn't be so careless even if the audience in the streaming room didn't remind her. In fact, every time she fetched water, she would ask someone to boil it in the pot and then put it back into the water bag. Jun. While she was reading the comments to kill time, a guard suddenly ran to her with a bloody coat in his hands. What happened? Jiang Pingji looked at the bloody coat that had been soaked in the water and took it. It was a cloak worn by an adult man. The material was exquisite. It was not the coarse cloth or linen that ordinary people usually used. Where did you find it? There were a few cuts on the cloak and fresh blood was still burning. In other words, the owner of the cloak had been killed not long ago and he was nearby. Jun, when we were collecting water, the cloak floated down from upstream. Jiang Pingji looked at the cloak and her eyes flickered. The atmosphere in the streaming room also fell into a strange silence. They all hoped that Jiang Pingji could go over and take a look. Maybe she could even save a life. But they didn't even need to think to know that the owner of the bloody clothes must have encountered bandits who committed murder and robbery in the deep mountains and forests. Or maybe they were being pursued by their enemies. If Jiang Pingji went there, she might be in danger. Kindness was a good quality, but it was not good to bring danger to strangers or the people around you. That was called St. Mary's disease. Coincidentally, the system's voice rang in Jiang Pingji's ears. It had been pretending to be deaf for a long time. Qing Qing, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. He is currently in an unknown danger. Please save him in half an hour. Once the mission is completed, the host will receive the reward of full breasts. Raise your wrists high and turn around, and your breasts will cover your clothes. If you fail, you will receive a level 6 electric shock as punishment. Please consider carefully and carry out the mission as soon as possible to prevent the target from dying. It was another real-time triggered mission. This time it was a level 6 electric shock. Jiang Pingji was speechless. System, you've been obedient for months. Why did you suddenly appear out of nowhere and cause trouble? What did a human do? Langjun, do you want me to go and take a look? The guard asked in a low voice. He was afraid that his voice would attract the attention of the thieves. No need. You go and tell the others to be quiet. Don't let the thieves find out and cause trouble. Jiang Pingji's face was cold. She threw the bloody cloak on the ground without even looking at it. Obviously, people with discerning eyes could tell her decision from her reaction. Yes, I understand. As the saying went, it was better to avoid trouble. There were only a few people who would stand up for injustice. As the guards who were responsible for Longjuan's safety, they didn't want any unnecessary trouble to happen. Some of the viewers in the streaming room were very anxious. They typed and scolded Jiang Pingji for being cold-blooded and heartless. Some of them could understand it rationally, but they were disappointed emotionally. They wanted to see a streamer who was righteous, not selfish and cold-blooded. At that moment, the system's voice came out. The system gritted its teeth. Don't tell me you want to refuse again. Host, if you don't listen to me, you will definitely regret it. Jiang Pingji sneered secretly. I won't do the mission. What can you do to me? The system said, level 6 electric shock punishment. Aren't you afraid of death? Will you let me die? Jiang Pingji asked secretly. The system choked and said angrily, you don't have to refuse the mission just to spite me. You're wrong. I won't save him just because he is Meng Zhan's best friend. Jiang Pingji replied coldly. The system, I quit. This host is too hard to deal with. I know she hates real-time missions, but does she have to go against me like this? About 10 minutes later, the guards had filled all the water bags. Jiang Pingji said to the crowd, let's go. The system kept trying to stop her in her mind. Jiang Pingji, are you really not going to save him? The viewers in the streaming room are throwing rotten eggs at you. As a streamer, you should create a positive image. If you don't save him today, you will lose fans. Shut up. Jiang Pingji spat out coldly. Her expression was very cold. The system was furious, but it couldn't change Jiang Pingji's mind. It could only snort angrily. At that moment, the guards realized that Lang Jun was leading them to another path. We're going the wrong way. Chapter 253. Jiang Pingji stopped in her tracks and suddenly tilted her head to look at him. She said, the path I say is the one. The guard was dumbfounded. He wondered if his Lang Jun had a bad sense of direction and was too shy to let others know about it. What are you waiting for? Follow me. Jiang Pingji snorted softly and looked askance at him. Her eyes were misty and she looked strangely proud. Of course, these troops did not understand what it meant to be Tsundra, but Jiang Pingji's awkward reaction did touch some people's cuteness. Yes. The guard responded in a loud voice and followed Jiang Pingji's footsteps closely. The audience in the live broadcast room suddenly reacted, and a guess spread in their hearts. Could it be that the host had changed his mind? Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan, streamer, although it's a virtue to stand up for injustice, you should still act within your means. Compared to a complete stranger, I still think that the safety of the host is more important. Even if you don't do anything, you are not in the wrong. Bingtang Lemon, +1. Streamer, you don't have to change your behavior because of other people's opinions. You only have so few people with you. If you meet a group of bandits, not only will you not be able to save them, but you will also get yourself killed. That's not worth it. There was a cost involved in saving people. Jiang Pingji and her group had only come out to look for water. They did not bring any lethal weapons. There were not many of them and their weapons were not good. If the number of bandits far exceeded Jiang Pingji's, wouldn't it be like sending a lamb into a tiger's den? Yuyida, Tisk, there are so many people who are being held hostage by morality. If the host didn't save them, it meant that he wasn't kind and benevolent. If she was in danger because she tried to save someone, would you keyboard warriors climb through the screen to save her? Host, you must be careful. The viewers in the live stream were very conflicted and their stance was not firm. Jiang Pingji clearly remembered that there was an ID who angrily scolded her for being cold-blooded. However, when she did something that seemed to be an omen of saving someone, the ID followed the crowd and angrily scolded those who were suspected of moral kidnapping, completely forgetting the contents of the bullet screen that he had previously posted. She sneered coldly in her heart. No matter how noisy the bullet screen was, she ignored it. Lao Siji Lianmeng, what are you arguing about? Is this the first time you've seen the host's personality of not getting up early without benefits? Compared to those fence-sitters, the truly loyal audience members were more rational and maintained their stance. They might not watch the live stream every day, but they could truly understand Jiang Pingji's character. Is she the kind of person who gets carried away by emotions and acts impulsively? Obviously she wasn't. Although she didn't know why she changed her mind at the last minute, there was one thing she was sure of. Her reason for saving people had nothing to do with the comments of the audience. If Jiang Pingji was the kind of streamer who could be easily persuaded by the audience, she would not be worth the attention of so many die-hard viewers. According to Lao Siji Lianmeng's thoughts, perhaps the reason why she saved him was just because the benefits of saving people were far greater than just standing idly by. Yes, Jiang Pingji was that realistic. You guys keep up, I'll go first. Jiang Pingji nimbly shook off the guards behind her with a few leaps. She stepped on a few boulders beside the waterfall and leaped up. The guards were dumbfounded. Could this be the legendary, leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls? One of them even wanted to imitate Jiang Pingji's movements, but as soon as his right foot stepped on the first boulder, he suddenly slipped and fell forward, causing him to fall hard. There was a tearing sound in his ears and his clothes were torn. At that moment, the guards found that the boulders beside the waterfall had become wet and slippery because of the splashing water. They couldn't even stand steadily in straw sandals, let alone Jiang Pingji, who was only wearing a pair of wooden clogs. So, how did Langjun get up? What are you waiting for? Hurry up and catch up. If anything happens to Langjun, you don't want to live anymore. At that moment, a guard's reprimand pulled them back from the shock. All of them used to be bandits. But after days of intense training and Suka's tireless brainwashing, they had already curbed their savagery. Not only were they loyal to Jiang Pingji, but they also behaved with a sense of righteousness that only a regular army could have. Their mental outlook was completely new. Jiang Pingji was good at martial arts, so she could easily climb up. They were a little stupid, but they could also find their own way. Ma. You go first. Maybe you can survive by jumping into the pool. Listen to me. Go. There was a pool under the waterfall and it wasn't very high. Mayam was a good swimmer, so she could survive by jumping into the pool. Ching Ching panted heavily. As he spoke, his wounds, big and small, were affected and fresh blood kept gushing out. Because of the excessive blood loss, his lips were pale and his face was stained with blood. Even in such a mess, it was difficult to hide his beauty. After that, he fumbled to pick up the sharp sword lying beside him, and with the tip of the sword on the ground, he struggled to stand up. If we die together. How can I let my husband face evil people alone? The hair of the woman in green next to Ching Ching was messy, and the pearls and jade on her head had long been lost in the escape. She held her husband's hand tightly and said word by word, "If my husband dies here, how can I live?" Ching Ching wanted to persuade her again, but he thought that they were in the wilderness. Even if his wife escaped and luckily avoided the murderous bandits, she couldn't survive in the dangerous jungle. He suddenly felt helpless and could only hold her hand tightly. Tenderness suddenly grew in his heart. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed up blood. With such a wife, what more can I ask for? Ching Ching took a deep breath, held her fingers tightly and said reluctantly, "Don't be afraid, Mum." At that moment, a series of messy footsteps came from afar. Occasionally it was mixed with angry curses. Ching Cheng's heart skipped a beat after hearing it. Those powerful bandits had gotten rid of the guards and were chasing after them? Here they are. They escaped pretty fast. More than 40 bandits were all holding shiny knives. Their coarse hemp clothes were stained with blood, but very few of them were really injured. Just kill them. Cut off their heads and take them back. Don't talk so much nonsense. Faintly, some of the bandits' curses were mixed with this kind of dialogue, which made Qing feel cold in his heart. When did the bandits become so powerful that they could kill more than 100 of his guards with only 40 to 50 people? What kind of bandits would kill people but not rob them? Instead, they would cut off the heads of others and take them away? This was obviously not a case of bandits killing people and robbing them, but someone deliberately waiting here to kill him. Qing's wife was also a heroine with a lot of courage. At this time, she also realized what was going on and looked at her husband with a serious face. Qing gritted his teeth and asked sternly, enduring the severe pain of his wound. Who sent you? Chapter 254. He was not an important official in the imperial court. He was just a small official in the county. Although he had some background, he hated the internal strife in the imperial court. Instead, he preferred to stay in small places and laze around. He was also careful in his daily life and would not offend anyone. So, who on earth wanted to kill him and paid a hitman to kill him? Ask the king of hell when you go to hell. The leader of the bandits smiled ferociously, and his eyes fell on the lady behind Qing with evil intentions. Qing's wife was in her early 30s and had 2 sons and a daughter. She knew how to live a good life, took good care of herself and had a good mentality. Except for her mature and gentle temperament, she was as beautiful as a 16-year-old girl. No wonder these bandits wanted to kill her. Anyway, all they needed to do was cut off Qing's head. It didn't matter how they dealt with the others. In order to catch Qing, the 2 brothers had been waiting in the wild for many months and hadn't even seen a female mosquito. They couldn't stand it anymore. Qing was a man, so he understood the meaning of these people's eyes. His face was cold and he was so angry that his wound was hurt. Facing dozens of evil eyes, Qing's wife made up her mind and grabbed the sword from Qing's hand. "Honey, I'm leaving now." After saying that, she was about to cut her throat. At this time, the bandits were also approaching. The situation had reached an irreversible point. Anger and hatred filled his chest. At this moment, all kinds of chaotic thoughts filled Qing's mind. The gentle and refined appearance of the past had been completely shattered. If the heavens had eyes and he could escape from death, he would definitely find out who was behind this and tear them to pieces. Clang! Qing's wife wanted to cut her throat, but her wrist was hit by a stone. The sharp sword suddenly fell from her hand and stuck into the ground. Tut tut tut. How can a bandit not know the rules? Qing and his wife didn't see it because of the angle, but the bandits clearly saw who was talking. The person jumped up from the waterfall and stopped Qing's wife from killing herself. At the same time, he spun around and kicked the bandit closest to Qing and his wife in the jaw. Half of the bandit's teeth fell out, his mouth was full of blood and his jaw was deformed. Although he was still breathing with that kind of strength, his brain was probably crippled by the kick. Almost in the blink of an eye, that person grabbed another person's hair bun and held a knife in his other hand. The long knife slashed across his neck, causing blood to spurt out. Qing and his wife were also so shocked that they didn't come back to their senses. When they calmed down and took a closer look, they found that the young man in the Confucian robe who suddenly appeared was not as tall as their little daughter. Seeing this, their joy was instantly suppressed. "Young friend, these villains are highly skilled in martial arts. There's really no need for you to get involved in this." Before Qing could finish his words, he saw that the man didn't even turn his head. He just crooked his finger at the bandits and his tone was full of contempt. "I'm here to save this woman. You can do whatever you want to the man." Qing and his wife were dumbfounded. The excited viewers in the livestream were speechless and sent a few colons. Apart from Jiang Pingji, who else could the person who suddenly appeared be? Her proposal was very friendly, but how could the ferocious bandit agree? Based on the fact that Jiang Pingji had crippled one person and killed another, they would not let her go. The system was also confused by Jiang Pingji's capricious behavior. "Didn't you say that you wouldn't do the mission if you didn't save people?" She didn't play by the rules at all and the system was a little stunned. Jiang Pingji was surprised. "I think his wife is quite beautiful. It's a pity that she died here. I don't care if the man dies or not, but I want to save the woman. If you think I'm doing a mission, I'll kill the man myself after we deal with these bandits. Then I'll fail the mission. The system, it didn't doubt the possibility that Jiang Pingji would do that. In order to resist the system, its host was also trying her best. Kill them all. The bandits looked at each other and saw the murderous intent in each other's eyes. Go. Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a sneer. The long knife in her hand was still dripping with blood. So soon there were people who couldn't help but rush up to die. The streaming room had been open for more than half a year, and the audience was already familiar with Jiang Pingji's temperament of killing people easily. At that moment, except for those who were timid and didn't dare to watch, many of the audience felt their blood boiling. After all, it was really helping people when they saw injustice. The hero complex in Wuxia novels was always not as good as it was in the TV series. The streamer was the real deal. No matter how good her acting skills were, it couldn't be so real and hot-blooded. Go ahead, but I'll lose if you cross this line. In terms of arrogance, Jiang Pingji was definitely at the level of an ancestor. As soon as he finished speaking, a few bandits rushed over with their swords raised high. Jiang Pingji's eyes flashed slightly when she saw the situation. Her lower body was as steady as a rock and her body was fast and agile. Although she looked thin and weak, she was no weaker than any man when it came to strength. She dodged and dodged 2 knife attacks aimed at her fatal parts, and at the same time she took the knife attacks from several people head-on. The bandits thought that they could kill Jiang Pingji with 1 knife attack, but the moment the knife touched her, it was their hands that were split open. The strong men were shocked by the huge force and they suddenly took 2 steps back. Their lower bodies were momentarily unsteady. It was also in such a short time that everything was difficult to recover. What great strength! That was also the last thought they had left in the world. Jiang Pingji didn't retreat but moved forward. The blade cut through the void, leaving a beautiful white shadow. At the same time, a cold breeze swept past her neck, and the temperature of her body suddenly receded. Her vision was dim and her eyes were spinning. Yuyida, kill. Bingtang Lemon, kill again. Yin Yueja Zhuge Qinmao, 1 more knife. Ji Kongting, still not dead. Jiang Pingji, do you think you're playing a game? Lao Ciji Lianmeng, congratulations to the streamer for completing a perfect 5 consecutive kills. After a while, Jiang Pingji had already seen through many problems, but there were still more questions left in her heart. The people in front of her were not bandits at all. Or rather, they were not authentic bandits. Instead, they were fighters carefully trained by others. The couple behind her was the target of their ambush. The man's name was Qing Qing. Since he could make friends with Meng Zhan in Psang Prefecture's Meng County, he was at least from an aristocratic family. What made her wonder was what was so special about this man that the system was afraid of and even wanted to kill him. Yes, the system had an ulterior motive. Even though they had been together for more than half a year, Jiang Pingji still didn't trust the system at all. Even though it issued a real-time task to save Qing Qing in Jiang Pingji's eyes, its real purpose was to kill Qing Qing. Jiang Pingji's resistance to the system was not a day or 2, and her hatred for real-time tasks was also deep in her heart. She boldly guessed that the system was persuading her to complete the task, but in fact, it was to provoke her and make her deliberately go against it. To that end, the system even took out the punishment of level 6 electric shock as reward bait. Chapter 255. In the blink of an eye, Jiang Pingji had cleanly taken away a few heads. His decisive and merciless manner even shocked these orthodox assassins. They were no match for Jiang Pingji and now they had the intention to retreat. Naturally, they were no match for her. One hesitation and their heads were separated from their bodies. There were more than a dozen corpses lying at Jiang Pingji's feet. Without exception, all of them were killed with 1 blow. Some died with their throats slit while others were beheaded with 1 blow. Their heads flew into the sky and blood splattered all over the ground. Some still had some flesh left. Compared to these people's heavy losses, Jiang Pingji was unscathed. Sticky blood kept dripping from the blade. Go. What are you afraid of? Everyone go. One of the bandits roared fiercely, but his companions were not encouraged. Instead, they were even more afraid. They were trying to move forward, but they took a small step back without a trace. Their faces were full of hesitation and fear. These people were almost scared out of their wits by Jiang Pingji. They obviously had an overwhelming advantage in terms of numbers, but no one dared to move forward. Who dared to rush to the front? The people who had rushed to the front were now lying on the ground like corpses. The blood that spurted out was still steaming. The more it was like this, the more afraid they were. The broadswords in their hands could not bring them any sense of security. Seeing this, Jiang Pingji sneered coldly. Tisk, cowardly rats. If these people could rush forward together and work together to deal with her, she could still look up to them and treat them a little more seriously. After all, no matter how strong she was, it was impossible for her to ignore the overwhelming number of swords that were swarming toward her. However, they revealed their fear of death after only a dozen of their companions were killed. Then they developed the thought of retreating in fear. Even if such people were armed with advanced laser weapons, they would still be useless. Jiang Pingji could kill them in minutes. They retreated, but Jiang Pingji would not. She suddenly gathered strength under her feet and moved forward quickly. The distance between the two of them was infinitely shortened. In the eyes of these bandits, Jiang Pingji seemed to suddenly leave her original spot and teleport in front of them. Her speed was frightening. Ghost. The word bandit escaped his mouth. However, before the next word left his mouth, a cold sensation flashed across his throat. The heat of his body poured out from this wound, causing his brain to stop working. Everything in front of him faded, becoming black, white, and gray. It was a one-sided massacre. The one who had the upper hand was not the bandits, who had a large number of people, but Jiang Pingji, who was covered in blood. Qing Qing and his wife were dumbfounded. They had thought that they were going to die, but they didn't expect to come back from the dead at the most desperate time. Mrs. Qing pursed her lips and supported her injured husband to the side to avoid being dragged into the battle. Qing Qing didn't forget what Jiang Pingji had said before. He held his wife's hand tightly and countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Darling. Qing Cheng's wife looked up at her husband, asking him silently with her eyes. Don't worry, madam. Just wait a little longer. He gently patted the back of his wife's hand to calm her down. While they were talking, Jiang Pingji killed a few more people. Her clothes had long been stained by blood, and her original color couldn't be seen. She looked like a ferocious ghost who had walked out of hell. The bandits were really scared out of their wits. Their legs were trembling and they were anxious. However, these people always remembered their mission. Since they couldn't do anything to Jiang Pingji, they could kill Qing Qing first. Otherwise, if the news of their mission failure got back, their families would probably die without a burial place. With this idea in mind, the remaining few people joined hands to hold Jiang Pingji back, and the other two went to kill Qing Qing and his wife. Darling. Qing Cheng's wife saw two people rushing out of the chaotic crowd. They raised their knives and intended to cut her husband. She hurriedly stood up and blocked them with her body. Everything happened so fast that it was too fast for her to react. Qing Qing saw it, but he was injured all over and could barely stand with his remaining strength. His wife stood in front of him. When he realized what was going on and wanted to push them away, the two knives were already close to him. Qing Qing lost his voice in fear. My wife. However, neither he nor Qing Cheng's wife, who was waiting for the pain with her eyes closed, saw the knives that were supposed to fall didn't come. The knives that were raised high suddenly stopped at the highest point as if time had stopped. The expressions of the two bandits also froze at the most ferocious and joyful moment. They seemed to have seen the scene of Qing Qing and his wife splashing blood on the spot, but it was impossible. As I said, you can do whatever you want. If you cross the line, I lose. Jiang Pingji's knife had already left her hand, and the two bandits who were frozen were killed by the knife that had disappeared. At that moment, except for the audience in the streaming room, no one knew how Jiang Pingji had done it. Although the two bandits were not side by side, they were not in front of each other either. How could she kill both of them with one knife? Jiang Pingji's back was facing the two bandits, and she was even pinned down by the enemy. How did she do it under such circumstances? The audience was in a life-and-death situation, so they naturally didn't have extra energy to pay attention to it. They couldn't see everything from their current point of view, but the audience in the streaming room could clearly see what had happened at that moment from God's perspective. Lao Ciji Lianming, she ran away so fast. I just saw the streamer's sword make a big turn. Yin Yueja Zhuge Qin Mo, what a beautiful double kill. De Zhuangzhu's wife, I screamed just now. My roommates thought something was wrong with me. It was so exciting. Yu Yi Huang Yi, the streamer's move just now was so cool. I really want to send you 666. Not only did the audience in the streaming room send a series of 666, but the platform was also flooded with all kinds of gifts. If it had encountered such a large number of gifts in normal times, the system would have come to Jiang Pingji to annoy her, but now it was strangely silent as if it didn't exist. Others didn't know, but Jiang Pingji knew why the system had such a reaction. Coca-Cola, wait a minute, the streamer doesn't have a weapon now. What should we do? This bullet screen was particularly glaring. Many of the viewers who had sent 666 quivered as they finally noticed this point. In order to save people, Jiang Pingji used a long knife to sneak attack the two bandits. Although she saved Cheng Cheng and his wife from danger, she also put herself in a desperate situation. She was now unarmed, but the bandits around her who were eyeing her were all holding sharp knives. Chapter 256. He wasn't a reckless or stupid person. He knew that if he reminded Jiang Pingji to be careful, it would remind the other bandits and boost their confidence. The threat of the bandits was not on the same level as that of a killer with a knife and an unarmed young man. However, even without Ching Cheng's reminder, the bandits reacted quickly. They were furious at first, then ecstatic. Let's go. This guy has no weapon. One of the bandits shouted. Everyone's eyes lit up with ecstasy. It was a heaven-sent opportunity. The broadswords in their hands were thirsty for blood. Whether they were weak or not had a weapon in their hands had nothing to do with each other. If Jiang Pingji had a knife, she could at least give them a quick death and they wouldn't feel any pain or torture when they died. But if she didn't have a knife, it would be a torture. The crisp and muffled sounds of bones cracking rose one after another. Even if Cheng Cheng and his wife left the battlefield, they could still hear the sounds clearly. Not to mention the audience in the streaming room. The superb streaming equipment gave them the most authentic enjoyment. Every time a bandit's hand, finger, leg, or neck was easily broken by Jiang Pingji, they would involuntarily tremble violently, as if the pain had fallen on their bodies, causing them to be startled. Jiang Pingji didn't have a weapon in her hands, but it didn't mean that she had lost her ability to fight. On the contrary, hand-to-hand combat was her strength. As a genetic warrior, how could she not have gone through training in this area? What made people unhappy was that she had practiced the moves hundreds of times in her mind, but her body couldn't keep up with the speed of her thinking. To put it simply, the quality of her body was too poor to satisfy Jiang Pingji. She was not satisfied, but in the eyes of the audience and the people present, her skills were beyond imagination. She was brave and invincible. I really don't know which family this, cough cough cough, Lang Jun is so young and brave. Ching Ching carelessly touched his wound as he spoke. Uncountable pain stimulated his nerves, and his chest was on fire as if it was being licked by a tongue of fire. Ching Cheng's wife secretly sighed. They couldn't even protect themselves now. They didn't know whether the young man was a friend or a foe. Ching Ching seemed to see his wife's worry. He looked down and shook his head, signaling her not to worry. Even though Jiang Pingji had spoken rudely before, if she really had evil intentions towards them, she wouldn't have needed to risk being besieged by the enemy and throw out the weapon in her hand to save them. She could have allowed the bandits to kill people. Since he had made a move, it proved that the other party had no intention of taking their lives. At this time there was another noise under the waterfall. Ching Ching and his wife looked at each other and saw the seriousness on each other's faces. Following the sound, he saw a few hands clawing at the edge, and after a while a few more heads popped out. Ching Ching quickly gripped the sharp sword in his hand, hesitating whether he should go forward and stab them before they came up. However, what if the people who climbed up weren't bandits but the companions of that young friend? On Ching Cheng's side, the guards who had climbed up with great difficulty were almost scared out of their wits. Lang Jun. The guards who had been struggling to climb up suddenly felt as if they had eaten spinach. They quickly climbed up and pulled out the swords at their waists, trying to help Jiang Pingji out of trouble. However, their Lang Jun was too brave and didn't give them a chance to perform. Bang! Jiang Pingji threw the last body on the ground and stood in the middle of the bodies with a cold face. She looked at the guards quietly. The guards who climbed up awkwardly, for some reason they felt a little guilty. It was okay to let their Langjun take the lead, but as guards they were not even of any use. It was a great shame. Go back and train well. Jiang Pingji stared at the guards for a few seconds, which directly made them feel guilty. None of the guards dared to look at her in the eyes. They felt guilty. How could they not feel guilty? It took a group of people so long to climb up a waterfall that wasn't very high. Jiang Pingji couldn't bear that kind of speed. If she really needed their help, the bodies would have been cold, so they needed to redouble their training. The guards all showed a bitter smile, but no one dared to refute Jiang Pingji's order. The guards all put their hands together. Yes, Langjun. Jiang Pingji was a little satisfied, and her tone finally softened a little. Clean up these bodies, dig a pit and burn them. Many of the guards secretly felt their teeth hurt. Their Langjun was really ruthless. How was she ruthless? Nowadays people paid attention to returning to their roots. It was fashionable to bury the dead. If they lost a limb when they were alive, they would be disabled when they went to hell. Not only would they be ashamed to meet their ancestors, but they would also be incomplete after reincarnation. Therefore, a full body burial was very important. But Jiang Pingji's words determined the fate of these people after they died. They couldn't even go to hell after death. So here was the problem. Was it more miserable to leave their bodies in the wilderness and have them eaten by wild animals, or to die without a full body and be unable to go to hell? The guards dared not refute Jiang Pingji, so they could only silently listen to her orders. After that, Jiang Pingji finally had the time to pay attention to the Qingqing couple. The man was tall and slender. He had a light and gentle temperament. Not to mention his looks, he gave off the impression that he was easy to get along with. He was very approachable. Jiang Pingji analyzed him from head to toe without batting an eyelid. Her eyes darkened slightly. On the other side, Qingqing had a strange feeling in his heart. He had an inexplicable feeling. Jiang Pingji glanced at the woman next to Qingqing and then said to one of the guards, "Do you have medicine with you? Treat this gentleman's wound. It's not a fatal wound, but if it's not treated, it'll be dangerous if he bleeds too much." Yes. The guard naturally brought enough medicine with him. "Thank you." Qingqing's wife took the medicine and bowed to Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji didn't go over to ask for more information. Instead, she sat on the side looking gloomy. Others thought she was in a daze, but in fact Jiang Pingji was just looking at the reward given by the system. Congratulations to the streamer for completing the real-time task, saving Qingqing. You have received the reward full breasts, white wrist high, body smooth, sexy shroud. Please receive the reward at the receiving desk. System, are you not happy? She asked the system in her heart. The system sent her a series of ellipses. This time I have completed the task you gave me perfectly. Jiang Pingji smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The system replied, "The host finally understands my painstaking efforts. I'm very happy." However, after the reply, the system became silent again. It wasn't as noisy as it usually was. Obviously, it wasn't as happy as she expected. Jiang Pingji could even imagine it gritting its teeth in anger. Chapter 257. Why was she angry? Maybe it was because Jiang Pingji didn't act according to the system's plan. It would be weird if she felt good. She couldn't help but laugh to herself. Her vigilance and defense against the system, which was not low in the first place, increased by another level. My instructor once told me that when you meet your enemy, the moment they want to kill you is the moment their weakness is the most obvious. Killing intent is also a kind of subjective emotion, and it often involuntarily reveals the most important motive. Jiang Pingji suddenly opened her mouth. The system couldn't stand it anymore. It sounded a little angry. "Host, what did you mean by that?" "What I mean is to tell you, if you want to scheme against me in the future, you better keep your foxtail," she said bluntly. The system was speechless. It was like it was constipated. It couldn't say a word. In fact, before Jiang Pingji opened her mouth, it didn't know how it had exposed its real purpose. There was nothing wrong with the triggered mission, but it still persuaded Jiang Pingji to carry out the mission. The reward, full breasts, was also something she couldn't complain about. As for the punishment, the system paid a lot of money. As long as she refused the mission, Jiang Pingji would be the winner in life. But she didn't play by the rules. The system didn't know where it was wrong until just now. It was calculating in its mind, but it forgot how smart its host was. It was only the description of the real-time triggered mission that made the host suspicious. Qing, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. He is in an unknown danger. Please save him in half an hour. The mission description didn't seem to be wrong, but it was a trap. Who was Qing? It described him as a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. The title didn't seem to be wrong, but Jiang Pingji was suspicious because of it. Those who could be friends with Meng Zhan were at least from a noble family. They might even be an official. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the description should be some family or some official. But the description given by the system was, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. Who was Qing to Meng Zhan? Why did the system put him in front of himself? He thought about the grudge between Jiang Pingji and Meng Zhan. Under normal circumstances, she would be lucky if she didn't leave after reading the mission description. If she failed the mission, she would be punished with a level 6 electric shock. Her force fusion would increase by at least 12 points. There were only benefits to rejecting the mission, and it was in line with Jiang Pingji's usual style. The second suspicious point was that the quest was only announced after blood robes appeared. According to Jiang Pingji's usual temperament, it was highly likely that she would help when she saw injustice. She was not afraid at all, but the system just had to issue a mission at this time. The mission content seemed to be to save people according to her wishes, but the effect was to dispel her thoughts. In that case, how could Jiang Pingji not be suspicious? The system, who understood everything, wanted to explode on the spot. This game can still be played? Its stomach was cramping and its head was hurting. It needed to calm down. After a long time, it consoled Jiang Pingji stiffly, even though it was useless. As the other half of the host, I can't possibly harm you. As for scheming against you, that's even more impossible. Jiang Pingji smiled and asked, System, when you said that, didn't you feel like you were lying? The system still wanted to explain, but she forcefully interrupted it and made it swallow its words. Forget it. I never wanted you to be loyal to me. No matter what your purpose is, it has nothing to do with me. However, I hope you can understand one thing. I, Jiang Pingji, am not someone that anyone can order around. I am not a tool that anyone can use to kill others. Even if it's you, the system. She clicked her tongue and did not hide her arrogance. She and the system had already shed all pretense of cordiality. Did not matter. The system sent a long string of ellipses. After spending half a year together, it more or less understood Jiang Pingji. Unnecessary explanations would only make her more disgusted and vigilant. So what if Jiang Pingji hated it? The relationship between the host and the system was simply that of a parasite and a parasite. Unless it left voluntarily, the other party could not do anything to it. Anyway, she had completed the mission. It had achieved half of its purpose. The system secretly held its breath and could only comfort itself. After this lesson, it would be fine to be more careful in the future. No matter how smart Jiang Pingji was, it was impossible for her to be flawless. One could only be a thief for 1,000 days. How could one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? Jiang Pingji said that being mentally retarded was a disease that could not be cured, just like the system. Her plan failed this time, but it still wanted to succeed next time. After the confrontation was over and the system dared not show itself, Jiang Pingji finally had the leisure to find out more about Qing's background. He was the first person who was seen as a thorn in the system's side and wanted to use her to watch Qing die. Coincidentally, Qing had already treated his wound with the help of his wife. He tied a clean gauze and barely stopped the bleeding. With the help of Qing's wife, he walked to Jiang Pingji with weak steps and bowed deeply. I am Qing from the Qing family of Lai. Thank you for your help that my wife and I were able to successfully escape from this disaster. Qing's face was still pale, but he slightly cleaned up his disheveled appearance. It was hard to hide his elegance. Jiang Pingji hurriedly returned the greeting. Hearing his background, she could not help but ask, the Qing family of Lanyi? Those with the surname Qing in Lanyi had inextricably linked blood relations with the gentry of the Qing family. Looking at the material of Qing's clothes and his wife's attire, both of their families were quite well off. Yes, Qing said. Jiang Pingji asked, Sir, you are from a noble family. Why didn't you bring any guards when you went out? Instead, you were targeted by those vicious people and provoked a vendetta? Qing looked doubtful. Not to mention Jiang Pingji, even he did not know how he had provoked such a group of people. If it is not convenient for you, I will not ask more. Qing hurriedly said, It is not like that. It is just that, even I have no clue about this matter. I think I have always been kind to people. Although I do not have many close friends, I have never been angry with others. I really do not know how I provoked others to kill me. This time when I went out with my wife, I knew that the outside world was turbulent, so I brought enough guards with me, but they all died in the hands of those vicious people. If it were not for Jiang Pingji's coincidental arrival, Qing and his wife would have died long ago. He was not afraid of death, but he did not like to die without knowing why. Chapter 258. Qing couldn't figure it out, but Jiang Pingji's words gave him a new suspect. Noticing the change in Qing's expression, Jiang Pingji asked casually, "Do you have someone in mind?" Qing couldn't say it out loud even if it was really that person, let alone just having a slight suspicion. Jiang Pingji didn't ask further. She glanced at Qing's wife. The couple had been living a comfortable life. They had never been as embarrassed as they were that day. She asked a very practical question. "I just heard from you that all the guards were killed by the villains. Now we're in the middle of nowhere and we're still a few days away from the nearest courier station. What's your plan?" Qing was injured and his wife didn't do any housework. They didn't know how to survive in the wild. Qing looked embarrassed when Jiang Pingji asked the question. Before he could say anything, Jiang Pingji continued, "If you don't mind and trust me, why don't I send you to the nearest station? You can settle down there and then contact your families. You are still in danger if you don't know the background of the thugs." Qing thanked Jiang Pingji for her kindness with shame. If they didn't get a ride, they would have a hard time surviving even if the thugs didn't kill them. Compared to Qing's gentleness, his wife was very straightforward. She liked Jiang Pingji more after witnessing what she did. "You have extraordinary skills and an imposing aura. I wonder which family you are from." "The Lu family of Hejian. My first name is Shi. My father is Lu Shi. If you don't mind, you can call me Lanting." After hearing this, Qing and his wife were both surprised, but they focused on different things. Qing's wife focused on the young man who was talented enough to be a good son-in-law. "You are Lu Zhongqing's son?" When Lu Shi was young, he was the man that many girls missed. The story of him and his wife, Gu Min, was even more popular. Qing's wife had never seen him, but she had heard about him. She didn't expect a talented man like Lu Shi to have such a powerful son. Those villains had forced the couple into a dead end, but in front of this young man they were so vulnerable. After a while, Mrs. Cheng's mind was already twisted. She labeled Jiang Pingji as the future son-in-law. If any family's daughter could marry Lu Shi's son, it would be a great deal. It was a pity that his daughter was still young. Otherwise he would really want to settle down for her. Qing's focus had nothing to do with Lu Shi. It was purely because of Lu Shi. "You're already 20? He didn't look like he was 12 or 13 at most." Jiang Pingji was stunned for a moment. She immediately understood the reason behind Qing's question. She explained, "The courtesy name of Lanting was left behind by my late mother. It's just that father and mother loved each other deeply. After mother passed away, she always called me Lanting. Since he had already given it, he might as well just use it. It would save him the trouble of giving it a nickname." Qing. Such a wild and unrestrained style was really something that Lu Shi would do. Most of the blood on her body had dried up. It was impossible to tell what she looked like. Jiang Pingji told the guards to protect Qing and his wife. She found a secluded place to wash her face. She couldn't wash off the other blood on her body, but she had to wash off the blood on her face. "You're really good looking. Do you have an uncommitted marriage?" Qing's wife was more and more satisfied with Jiang Pingji. She saw that Jiang Pingji looked so delicate and pretty. Although she was a little feminine, she was a popular image of a handsome young man. She was tempted and wanted to be a matchmaker for Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji nodded and then shook her head. She said, "I did have an engagement, but Master Liaochen told my fortune. He said that I shouldn't get married early. Otherwise it would be harmful. So I had to cancel the engagement in order not to waste the girl's time." Qing's wife gave up on the idea of being a matchmaker. He felt it was a pity. She didn't doubt the truth of Jiang Pingji's words. Marriages between gentry families were not child's play. Unless it was unavoidable, they wouldn't cancel the engagement. Jiang Pingji's reason was irrefutable. Qing looked at Jiang Pingji's face thoughtfully until his wife pinched him. Her husband was a good teacher. She didn't want to spoil Jiang Pingji's mood by talking nonsense. Ching smiled bitterly. You've misunderstood me. I just think that you look familiar. I think I've seen you somewhere before. Since Lanting is Lu Zhongqing's son, he naturally looks like him. Why are you thinking about this? Ching was speechless. He had never really met Lu Shi. They had been friends for a long time. They both knew of Lu Shi, but they had never met. The circle of gentry families was not big, but it was not small either. He had never met Lu Shi, but he had made friends with the same people. He had heard about Lu Shi from his friends. Therefore Ching said that Lu Shi looked familiar was not because of Lu Shi. He thought about it and suddenly remembered that he had seen an unfinished painting from his friend a few months ago. If the woman in the painting was a few years younger, more youthful and softer, wouldn't that be Lu Shi? However, Lu Shi was Lu Shi's second legitimate son. He was the daughter of a concubine in the Lu family and had been raised in a boudoir. But could it be that the woman sleeping among the flowers in his friend's painting was the late Gu Min? It was terrifying to think about it. However, it was not impossible to think about it this way. His friend was Yuan Jing's disciple, and Yuan Jing had some contact with Gu Min when he was young. Perhaps he knew about Gu Min's appearance through Yuan Jing. Are you in trouble, master? Jiang Pingji opened the way with her knife and walked in front. The shrubs were cleared more thoroughly than before. It was more convenient for Ching and his wife to walk. I see that you look troubled. Ching was speechless. He felt that it was better not to tell the young man in front of him that there was a boy who was not much older than him who painted his mother. It's nothing. I'm just thinking about who wants me dead. Ching found a reasonable excuse. Although I have some guesses, I don't think that person would do such a thing. So that was what he was worried about. Jiang Pingji was not suspicious. Even though she could see that Ching was a little guilty, it was not appropriate for her to ask. Langdon, you're finally back. The guards found traces of a fight nearby. Suka saw a few people walking out of the forest from afar. From afar, Suka saw a few figures walking out of the forest. He hurriedly trotted forward and swallowed all the words he wanted to say. Who could tell him that Lang Jun had only gone out to fetch water? Although it took a long time, how could he be covered in blood when he came back? Chapter 259. Suku was confused, but Jiang Pingji was much calmer. What kind of fight? She threw a few water bags to Suku and said, ask the guards to gather some firewood and boil it in a pot. Put it back in the water bags when it's cold. The water in the stream is not clean after all. Boil it before drinking. He hurriedly took the water bags and found 2 new faces in Jiang Pingji's team. Suka said, the guards who were looking for firewood reported that they found several carriages and horses without people on the road ahead. There were many corpses lying around. After checking, they found that there was a fierce fight not long ago. The master is worried that it was done by the mountain bandits. Suku had been to that place. After careful inspection, he found that the possibility of the bandits committing the crime was very low. It was more like a premeditated murder. Therefore he could not help but worry about his Lang Jun, who had gone out to fetch water. He was about to lead some people to search for her, but Jiang Pingji came back with blood all over her body. If it were not for the fact that it was broad daylight, Suku would have thought that it was the ghost of his Lang Jun's death. His heart almost stopped beating. He was scared to death. Jiang Pingji immediately understood and said, those should be Mr. Cheng's carriages. They were attacked by bandits on the road. I happened to pass by and helped them beat the bandits back. Xiao Yu asked someone to prepare some food. She said it lightly as if she did not remember that they were surrounded by 40 or 50 bandits. Of course, Suku was misled into thinking that those were just ordinary mountain bandits. He did not think too much about it. His Longjuan's face was ruddy, her eyes were still clear, and she was full of energy. He could tell that she was fine at first glance. Well, it was probably those bandits who got into trouble. With that conclusion, Suku did not panic at all. Yes, I'll do it now. Suku was completely familiar with the housekeeper mode. He did whatever Jiang Pingji said. Oh, and asked Takshu to bring me some clean clothes. I need to find a place to wash up. It's uncomfortable to have blood on my body. The viewers in the streaming room were instantly excited. Outdoor bathing play. According to the routine, there must be a fool who accidentally passed by, saw her, and then accidentally met the streamer. Just thinking about it made him feel sweet. Ha, sweet. If Jiang Pingji didn't even have this little bit of vigilance, she would have died a few times. Taxia heard the news and ran over. She was relieved to see that Jiang Pingji was fine, apart from looking a little disheveled. Please wait for a moment, Langjun. I will go prepare the clothes. After she finished speaking, Taxia retreated. She went to the carriage's trunk to find a set of clean clothes, a towel and soap. County Chief Lu is here. Ching saw that Jiang Pingji was done with her work and asked. Yes, I heard that my father is this year's General Evaluation Officer and needs to go to Shangjing to take charge. Ching, is there anything wrong? He felt that Cheng's expression was slightly speechless. Ching continued to be silent with a complicated expression. After a long time he said with a wry smile, people used to say that Lu Zhongqing was wild and unruly. I used to think that it was someone else who wanted to discredit County Chief Lu. But now it seems that he was right. The evaluation was imminent, but the chief examiner was only on his way now. Lu Shi, as soon as he arrived, he heard someone bad-mouthing his daughter and damaging his image as a father. Who did he offend? He was an old fox in the officialdom, so he did not take Cheng's words to heart. Lanting, these two are. Lu Shi walked over and saw the face of the person who had bad-mouthed him. Just one glance and the unhappiness in his heart disappeared. Although Ching and his wife looked disheveled, they still looked elegant. No matter who saw them, they would sincerely praise them. Father. She told her father what had happened in detail and said, it was fate that brought us together, so I invited Mr. and Mrs. Ching to come and we planned to go to the next station together. After all, the murderer's purpose and background are still unknown. If we leave them in the wilderness, I am afraid that their lives will be in danger. Father, what do you think? As Jiang Pingji spoke, she found that Lu Shi's eyes were a little blank. She could not help but frown. It seemed that the couple behind her had some background. Otherwise, why would Lu Shi have such an expression? In fact, Ching and his wife did have some background, but not yet. Lu Shi was a man who had been through a lot. He had met Feng Jin, Su Ku and Qiguan Rang. Ching was no exception. It's Ching Wenfu. Nice to meet you. Lu Shi knew Ching and called him by his name. Cheng's face became serious. They were talking to each other, but their eyes were looking at each other. Before this, they had never met each other, but through a few mutual friends, they more or less had some understanding of each other. Now that they saw each other in person, they naturally couldn't wait to size each other up and see if they were really as outstanding as others said. Ching was thinking about this, but Lu Shi had other considerations. Because of his daughter and wife, Lu Shi knew some secrets that were not known to others, and one of them was Ching. Today Ching was just an unknown county official, living a leisurely life with his wife. Not to mention the outside world, even in the Ching family, Ching did not have much of a presence. He was low-key and humble, so he was not well known. Except for a small number of friends who knew his background, outsiders thought that Ching was just an idle person with no ambition. That was what Lu Shi knew, and the other part was from his wife. Ching was the first historian who presided over the compilation of the history of the 16 kingdoms, the Xia dynasty and the Jiang dynasty for the first 60 years. He spent 35 years restoring countless cultural relics and ancient books. He created a new chapter in the history books. He became the imperial censor and was posthumously awarded the title after his death. More importantly, according to Amin's rather resentful description, this capable person, with the support of Jiang dynasty's first ancestor, Emperor Qin, Jiang Pingji, took the lead in formulating a relatively complete examination system for selecting students. She determined many compulsory subjects for students. Lu Shi did not know why his wife was so resentful, but he thought about it when he was young and hated studying. He hated this kind of teacher who would press his head down and force him to recite. Despite her resentment, Gu Min had a very high opinion of this historian. Although Jiang dynasty's founding emperor was the first emperor, she had a bad reputation because of her status as a woman and her ruthless methods when fighting for the throne. Only Ching insisted on upholding the integrity of a historian. Black is black, white is white. His description of Emperor Qin was detailed and objective, and he never hid his praise. He even wrote a book to refute other groundless slander. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.